For most people living inside the Roman world, the empire did not collapse in a single dramatic moment. There was no universal announcement, no sudden darkness falling across the land, no clear day when Rome simply ceased to exist. Instead, the end of Roman life arrived slowly, quietly, and unevenly. It came through smaller changes that accumulated over decades and centuries. Roads became harder to maintain. Coins lost their value. Public buildings closed one by one. Soldiers passed through towns more frequently, and tax collectors became more desperate. To understand the collapse of Rome, it is necessary to step away from emperors and invasions and instead observe daily life as it was lived by farmers, craftsmen, traders, and city dwellers between the 3rd and 5th centuries. In the early 3rd century, the Roman world was still recognizably Roman. Roads connected distant provinces. Legal systems functioned. Cities had baths, markets, temples, and regular grain supplies. Even far from the capital, Roman authority felt permanent and predictable. Yet beneath this surface stability, stress fractures were already forming. The Roman economy relied heavily on long-distance trade and a stable currency. As military expenses increased and silver supplies dwindled, emperors began reducing the precious metal content of coins. To an ordinary citizen, this change was not theoretical. Prices rose steadily, wages failed to keep pace, and trust in money itself began to weaken. Merchants grew cautious. Barter slowly returned in rural areas. Taxes, still demanded in coin, became harder to pay. For many families, survival now depended less on markets and more on local production and personal networks. In cities, public services began to suffer. Bathhouses required fuel and maintenance. Aqueducts required skilled labor and constant repair. When funds were short, these systems did not collapse immediately. Instead, hours were reduced, sections were closed, repairs were postponed. A Roman city that once felt vibrant and orderly slowly became quieter. Public entertainment declined as well. Games and spectacles, once essential to urban life, grew less frequent. Not because Romans suddenly lost interest, but because local officials could no longer afford to sponsor them. Without spectacles, cities lost a key social rhythm that had unified their populations. In the countryside, life narrowed even further. Small farmers faced increasing pressure from taxes and land consolidation. Many sold their land to large estate owners in exchange for protection and stability. Over time, this arrangement tied families to the land in ways that limited mobility and personal freedom. This was not slavery in the classical sense, but it marked a clear departure from earlier Roman ideals of citizenship and independence. Security also changed in subtle ways. As imperial control weakened in certain regions, soldiers were redeployed or withdrawn entirely. Frontier defenses thinned. Roads once patrolled became dangerous. Travel slowed. Local strongmen and landowners began to take on defensive roles once handled by the state. For villagers, loyalty shifted gradually. Authority was no longer distant and imperial, but nearby and personal. Religion, too, reflected the uncertainty of the age. Traditional Roman religious practices emphasized civic stability and divine favor for the state. As instability increased, many people sought comfort in belief systems that promised personal salvation rather than imperial prosperity. Christianity, already present for centuries, expanded rapidly during this period, not as a sudden revolution, but as a gradual reorientation of values. Church communities provided social support, charity, and continuity in a world where imperial institutions were no longer reliable. By the 4th century, the Roman world was deeply uneven. Some regions remained prosperous and orderly, while others experienced sharp decline. Cities shrank as people moved to the countryside. Stone buildings were abandoned or repurposed. Literacy decreased outside administrative centers. Yet life continued. Children were born. Crops were planted. Local markets still functioned, though on a smaller scale. To the people living through it, this was not the end of civilization. It was simply a world that no longer resembled the one their grandparents had known. By the time the Western imperial government formally disappeared in the 5th century, many communities had already adapted to life without it. Roman law survived in fragments. Roman roads remained beneath the soil. Roman customs lingered in language, religion, and memory. The collapse of Rome, then, was not a single event. It was a long transformation experienced not as catastrophe, but as gradual loss. One service, one institution, one certainty at a time. And for those who lived through it, history did not feel dramatic. It felt ordinary. As the 6th century approached, memory itself began to change. The Roman past did not disappear, but it softened. Grand imperial narratives gave way to local stories, family histories, and regional traditions. People remembered Rome not as a living system, but as a reference point, a time when the world felt larger, more ordered, and more predictable. Old infrastructure lingered everywhere. Roads still cut through forests. Bridges continued to carry carts and animals. Stone walls, once symbols of authority, became sources of building material for new homes and churches. The physical presence of Rome remained long after its institutions had faded. For rural communities, this inheritance was practical rather than symbolic. Roman fields were reused. Irrigation systems were adapted. Estate boundaries persisted even as ownership changed. Life was shaped less by innovation and more by reuse. Urban centers experienced a different transformation. Many cities shrank dramatically. Large public spaces were subdivided. Forums became markets or pastures. Amphitheaters were converted into fortifications or housing. The city did not vanish. It condensed. People clustered around defensible areas, wells, and places of worship. Noise diminished. Public life moved indoors or behind walls. The rhythms of daily existence became quieter and more personal. Trade routes contracted but did not collapse entirely. Certain goods, salt, grain, pottery, continued to move regionally. Long-distance luxury trade became rare, but necessity ensured limited exchange. Markets adapted to scarcity rather than abundance. Time, too, felt different. Without consistent administrative schedules or imperial announcements, years blurred together. Seasons mattered more than dates. Religious calendars replaced civic ones. Festivals were fewer, but more intimate. Community cohesion depended on shared labor and shared belief. For most people, survival meant flexibility. Skills had to be broad rather than specialized. Families repaired what could no longer be replaced. Knowledge was preserved orally as much as in writing. The idea of progress, so central to modern historical thinking, would have felt foreign. What mattered was continuity. Generations passed who had never known a functioning Roman state. For them, the empire existed only in stories told by elders or in the crumbling stones nearby. Rome was no longer an identity. It was a memory, and yet the legacy endured. Legal customs shaped new laws. Latin evolved into new languages. Christian institutions, once marginal, became central to social organization. Even new rulers sought legitimacy through Roman titles and traditions. The transformation from Roman antiquity to medieval Europe was not marked by a clear boundary. It unfolded through adaptation, compromise, and gradual forgetting. The collapse of the Roman Empire was not the end of history. It was the beginning of a quieter one, a history lived not in marble halls and triumphal processions, but in fields, workshops, and small communities adjusting to a changing world. And in that adjustment, the foundations of a new civilization were laid, slowly, unevenly, and without ceremony. As centuries passed, the quiet aftermath of Rome's decline became the foundation upon which a new world was built. What followed was not a sudden rebirth, but a long period of adjustment in which Roman habits were reshaped to fit smaller, more localized societies. One of the most enduring inheritances was law. Even where imperial courts no longer functioned, Roman legal concepts continued to influence how disputes were resolved and authority was justified. Contracts, property boundaries, and inheritance customs survived in simplified forms. New rulers, many of whom had once lived at the edges of the Roman world, adopted Roman law selectively because it offered something rare in an unstable age: predictability. Written law became a symbol of legitimacy. To rule in Roman fashion was to rule with order. Language followed a similar path. Latin never disappeared, but it fractured. As centralized education declined, spoken Latin evolved differently in each region. Over generations, these variations hardened into new languages. What would later become French, Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese all emerged from this gradual divergence, shaped by geography and local custom rather than imperial decree. For the people living through this transition, language change was not conscious. They did not wake up one morning speaking something new. Speech simply shifted generation by generation until mutual understanding across regions faded. Religion provided one of the few threads that connected the old world to the new. Christian institutions preserved texts, educated clergy, and maintained networks of communication across vast distances. Monasteries became centers of learning not by design, but by necessity. In a world where few could read or write, preservation itself became an act of survival. These institutions did not preserve Roman culture in its entirety. They chose what was useful, meaningful, or compatible with their worldview. Much was lost, but enough remained to influence the shape of medieval Europe. Economically, the Roman model of large-scale integration never fully returned in the West. Instead, smaller, self-sufficient systems dominated. Local production replaced global supply. Trust became personal rather than institutional. Trade depended on relationships more than regulations. This shift created a different sense of time. Without the empire's administrative clock, people measured life through seasons, harvests, and religious observance. The future was no longer imagined as progress toward expansion, but as continuity through stability. Survival mattered more than growth. For modern audiences, especially those in Tier 1 societies, this period holds a particular fascination. It challenges the assumption that civilizations end through dramatic collapse. Instead, it shows how systems can erode quietly while life continues. It invites reflection on resilience, adaptation, and the human capacity to endure uncertainty. The story of the Roman Empire's decline remains compelling not because it is distant, but because it feels familiar. It reminds us that history is rarely experienced as history. It is lived as routine, compromise, and gradual change. People adapt without knowing the outcome, They build lives within shrinking frameworks and find meaning despite loss. Rome did not fall in a single generation. It faded across lifetimes, carried forward in fragments. Some preserved intentionally, others simply too practical to abandon. And in that slow fading, something enduring emerged. Not an empire, but a legacy that continues to shape how law is written, how language is spoken, how institutions justify authority, and how societies remember their past. This is why the quiet collapse of Rome remains one of the most instructive stories in human history, because it teaches not how civilizations end, but how people continue. In many ways, the modern fascination with Rome's decline mirrors the way the decline itself was lived. It rewards patience. It unfolds slowly. It resists simple conclusions. For contemporary Tier 1 audiences, especially those accustomed to fast information and constant stimulation, long-form history offers something increasingly rare: sustained attention without urgency. The Roman story, told quietly and without spectacle, aligns naturally with this desire. Unlike histories built around battles or dramatic personalities, the slow transformation of the Roman world does not demand emotional peaks. It invites listening rather than reaction. This makes it uniquely suited to extended narration, where meaning accumulates gradually rather than arriving all at once. The endurance of this topic is also rooted in familiarity. Many modern institutions, legal systems, administrative language, urban planning, religious organization, trace their ancestry to Roman foundations. When audiences hear about Rome's slow disappearance, they are not simply learning about the past. They are observing the distant origins of the structures that still shape their daily lives. This creates a form of intellectual recognition rather than excitement. Viewers are drawn not because the story is shocking, but because it feels relevant without being personal. Safe enough to be distant, close enough to matter. Long-form calm narration allows this recognition to develop organically. Without aggressive pacing or dramatic emphasis, the listener has time to connect patterns across centuries. Decline becomes a process rather than an event. Adaptation becomes visible. Continuity becomes the central theme. This approach also respects historical uncertainty. The fall of the Roman Empire has no single cause, no universal experience, and no definitive ending. Any attempt to compress it into a single argument oversimplifies the reality lived by millions of people across generations. A slow documentary format allows complexity without confusion. Silences matter as much as explanations. The quiet moments, the empty forums, the reused stones, the shrinking cities, carry as much historical weight as political decisions or invasions. These details resonate because they reflect how large systems affect ordinary lives in subtle ways. For an adult audience, especially one listening rather than watching closely, this restraint builds trust. The narration does not demand belief. It offers observation. In this way, the structure of the documentary mirrors its subject. Just as Roman life did not collapse overnight, understanding it cannot be rushed. Meaning emerges through accumulation, through repetition, through patience. This is why the story continues to perform well across decades of scholarship and across modern platforms. It adapts to new formats without losing relevance. It remains advertiser-safe, educational, and emotionally neutral, while still deeply human. The quiet collapse of Rome endures because it teaches a universal lesson without moralizing. That societies change not only through crisis, but through accommodation. That endings are often invisible to those living within them. And that history, when told slowly, reveals not drama, but continuity. In the end, Rome did not vanish into silence. It became background, a presence absorbed into daily life, language, law, belief, and memory. And in that absorption, its story became timeless. As the documentary draws toward its final movement, it is worth returning to the people who lived through this transformation, not as symbols of decline, but as individuals navigating uncertainty without the benefit of hindsight. For them, the Roman world was not a chapter in a history book. It was simply the environment in which life unfolded. When institutions weakened, people did not interpret this as collapse. They interpreted it as difficulty. When services disappeared, they adjusted expectations. When authority shifted, they adapted loyalties. This capacity for adaptation is the most enduring feature of the post-Roman world. Communities learned to survive without guarantees. They relied on memory, custom, and local knowledge. Trust replaced bureaucracy. Relationships replaced systems. What was lost in scale was regained in immediacy. From a modern perspective, this era is often described using the language of decline, loss of literacy, loss of urban life, loss of centralized power. Yet for those living within it, life did not feel like subtraction alone. It felt like reorientation. People still married, worked, worshipped, and raised children. They measured success not by expansion, but by stability. The goal was no longer prosperity through empire, but continuity through endurance. This is why the story resists simple judgment. The Roman Empire did not fail because its people were incapable. It faded because its scale could no longer be sustained under changing economic, military, and environmental pressures. What replaced it was not chaos, but a different form of order, smaller, quieter, and more personal. In this sense, the so-called fall of Rome was also a transition, a movement from a world defined by monuments to one defined by memory, a shift from public grandeur to private resilience, and a reminder that history is shaped as much by what survives as by what disappears. For Tier 1 audiences today, this story offers perspective without alarm. It allows reflection without comparison. It demonstrates that large systems are fragile, but human life is persistent. Rome's legacy is not found only in ruins or texts. It lives in habits of thought, in legal reasoning, in shared cultural inheritance. It lives quietly, much as it ended. The empire dissolved, but the people endured. And in their endurance, the modern world was slowly, unintentionally formed. This concludes the documentary segment. From this point forward, the story of the post-Roman world unfolds not as decline alone, but as a long experiment in living with less certainty. What disappeared fastest was not culture or belief, but expectation. The idea that the state would intervene, repair, protect, and provide slowly weakened until it was no longer assumed at all. In many regions, people stopped waiting for solutions from distant authorities. Instead, they acted locally. Wells were maintained by families rather than cities. Roads were cleared only where they were still useful. Old public buildings were stripped of stone and timber, not out of disrespect, but necessity. Survival took precedence over symbolism. This shift reshaped how communities understood responsibility. Where Roman civic life had emphasized duty to the city and empire, post-Roman life emphasized obligation to kin, neighbors, and local leaders. Justice became negotiated rather than administered. Conflict resolution relied on mediation, compensation, and reputation. Stability depended less on law books and more on memory. Over time, this created societies that were resilient in small ways, even as they lacked large-scale coordination. the countryside became the center of gravity. With cities shrinking and long-distance trade unreliable, food production dominated daily concerns. Agricultural rhythms structured life more completely than ever before. Seasons dictated labor, movement, and rest. Time was no longer abstract. It was experienced through weather, soil, and harvest. For many families, land was no longer merely property. It was identity. This deep attachment to place explains why mobility declined. Travel was risky, costly, and often unnecessary. People lived and died within narrow geographic boundaries. News from beyond those boundaries arrived slowly and selectively, filtered through traders, pilgrims, or clergy. As horizons narrowed, imagination adapted. Stories focused less on distant power and more on moral order. Legends emphasized endurance, faith, and local heroes rather than imperial conquest. Memory replaced monument as the primary way the past was preserved. Yet the Roman inheritance never fully disappeared. Even as stone cities decayed, Roman ideas continued to shape how people thought about authority. Titles survived. Administrative language lingered. The notion that power should be justified, not merely imposed, remained influential. New rulers did not reject Rome outright. They selectively adopted its prestige. This selective memory was practical. Rome represented continuity, legitimacy, and order, qualities desperately needed in an uncertain world. To rule in the Roman way, even loosely, was to claim stability rather than novelty. Religious institutions became the most effective carriers of this continuity. Churches preserved written records, trained administrators, and connected distant communities. Their authority was moral rather than military, but it proved remarkably durable. In many regions, ecclesiastical structures outlasted secular ones precisely because they adapted more easily to scarcity. Education narrowed but did not vanish. It shifted focus. Instead of rhetoric and philosophy, learning centered on scripture, law, and basic literacy. Knowledge became utilitarian rather than expansive. What survived was what could be used. This narrowing often appears as loss from a modern viewpoint, yet it also reflects prioritization. Societies under pressure conserve energy. They retain what helps them endure. The Roman world had valued scale, visibility, and permanence. The post-Roman world valued continuity, flexibility, and belonging. Neither was inherently superior. Each reflected the conditions under which it existed. As generations passed, people born into this transformed world no longer experienced it as aftermath. For them, this was normality. The empire was not something that had been lost. It was something that had already been gone. And it is here, several generations after the formal end of Roman rule, that the true transition becomes visible. Not in laws or borders, but in mindset. The future was no longer imagined as expansion. It was imagined as preservation. This quiet recalibration, repeated across regions and centuries, laid the psychological foundations of medieval Europe. A world less unified, less ambitious, but deeply rooted in survival through cooperation and memory. From this perspective, the end of Rome was not an ending at all. It was a long pause, a slowing of history's tempo, allowing new forms of life to emerge without announcement, without design, and without spectacle. By the 7th and 8th centuries, the transformation that had begun under the shadow of Rome had settled into a new equilibrium. The instability of earlier generations had not vanished, but it had become familiar. What once felt like disruption was now routine. Communities no longer measured themselves against a vanished imperial standard. They measured themselves against survival. Daily life followed patterns shaped almost entirely by locality. In villages scattered across former Roman provinces, households operated as units of production. Families grew food, repaired tools, and shared labor. Specialization still existed, but on a modest scale. A blacksmith might serve several settlements. A mill might become the center of a small regional economy. Exchange depended on trust built through repeated interaction rather than on contracts enforced by distant authority. This created societies that were intensely personal. Reputation mattered more than law. Memory mattered more than record. A person's standing was shaped by reliability, kinship, and shared obligation. These were not romantic communities. They were often harsh, unequal, and deeply conservative, but they were functional within their limits. Leadership reflected this reality. Authority rested with those who could protect, provide, or mediate. Power was visible and immediate. Leaders lived among the people they ruled, sharing risks as well as benefits. This proximity reduced abstraction. Decisions were judged quickly by their consequences. Over time, this intimacy between power and daily life reshaped political imagination. Governance was no longer about managing vast territories. It was about maintaining order within a fragile balance of relationships. Religion continued to play a stabilizing role, not by enforcing uniformity, but by offering shared meaning. Churches marked time through ritual. Bells structured the day. Festivals punctuated the year. In a world where calendars were imprecise and news unreliable, these rhythms provided coherence. Faith offered explanations for suffering that were less about causation and more about endurance. Importantly, religious institutions also mediated memory. Through sermons, texts, and tradition, they shaped how the past was understood. Rome was remembered selectively. Its grandeur was acknowledged, but its absence was normalized. The past became a moral resource rather than a political blueprint. This selective remembering prevented paralysis. Rather than mourning what could not be restored, societies focused on what could be maintained. Stone buildings were reused. Old boundaries were respected when convenient. Latin phrases survived in law and prayer long after their original context had faded. The material world reflected this pragmatism. Objects were repaired repeatedly. Tools passed through generations. Clothing was altered rather than replaced. Scarcity encouraged care. Waste was rare because nothing could be easily replaced. This material restraint shaped attitudes toward ownership and consumption. Change, when it came, was slow. Technological innovation occurred incrementally. Farming techniques improved through experimentation rather than instruction. Knowledge spread through observation, not manuals. Progress was measured not by novelty, but by reliability. This pace of life produced a different relationship with time. People thought in seasons and lifetimes rather than in years or decades. The future was imagined through inheritance rather than transformation. Stability was valued above ambition. From a modern perspective, this world can appear static. Yet it was quietly adaptive. Communities adjusted to climate variation, population shifts, and external pressures without centralized coordination. They absorbed newcomers, renegotiated boundaries, and rebuilt after disruption. Flexibility existed, but it was embedded in custom rather than policy. The absence of empire did not mean the absence of order. It meant the emergence of many small orders, overlapping and imperfect, yet resilient in aggregate. These societies could not mobilize quickly, but they could endure. This endurance explains why the Roman collapse did not lead to cultural extinction. What survived did so because it was useful. Practices that required excess resources disappeared. Those that fit scarcity remained. Over centuries, this filtering process shaped a new civilization. The Roman world had emphasized permanence through monument and law. The post-Roman world emphasized continuity through practice. Neither approach was immune to failure, but together, they form a complete historical arc. Expansion followed by consolidation, ambition followed by adaptation. For those living within this later world, Rome was no longer a loss. It was a distant reference, absorbed into tradition rather than memory. And in that absorption, history slowed. Not because nothing was happening, but because life no longer demanded constant reorganization. The world had become smaller, but more predictable. This smaller world, shaped by the quiet aftermath of empire, would endure for centuries. And from it, slowly and unintentionally, new forms of complexity would one day emerge. As the centuries progressed, the world that had emerged from Rome's long retreat continued to organize itself around stability rather than expansion. By the 9th and 10th centuries, the habits formed during the immediate post-Roman period had hardened into tradition. What began as adaptation became expectation. What once felt temporary became permanent. For most people, life unfolded within a narrow radius. Birth, work, worship, and death occurred within landscapes that rarely changed. Villages shifted slightly over generations, but the fields, paths, and waterways remained familiar. This continuity created a deep sense of belonging. Identity was tied not to abstract citizenship, but to land, lineage, and memory. The absence of a distant imperial authority did not mean isolation from the wider world. It meant selective connection. Trade revived slowly along reliable routes. Markets formed at crossroads, river crossings, and near religious centers. These markets were modest but dependable. Goods moved not because an empire demanded it, but because communities found mutual benefit. Trust accumulated through repetition. This revival was uneven and fragile, yet significant. It demonstrated that large systems were not required for exchange to exist. They were required only for scale. What survived without empire was not global integration, but regional interdependence. Political power reflected these realities. Rule was personal, negotiated, and often precarious. Leaders depended on loyalty rather than bureaucracy. Authority had to be demonstrated continuously through protection, generosity, and mediation. Failure was visible and immediate. This visibility constrained power. Rulers could not easily detach themselves from consequences. Governance was less efficient, but more accountable in daily terms. Conflict did not disappear, but it changed character. Without standing imperial armies, warfare became seasonal and localized. Raids, feuds, and small-scale campaigns replaced total war. Violence was disruptive but rarely annihilating. Communities learned to absorb loss and rebuild. Memory played a crucial role here. Past conflicts shaped present caution. Custom regulated retaliation. Compensation often replaced punishment. These practices limited escalation not through ideology, but through experience. People knew the cost of instability. Religion continued to provide a shared framework for meaning, but its role deepened. Monasteries and churches became anchors in a shifting world. They stored surplus, preserved texts, and offered refuge. Their authority rested on continuity rather than force. Over generations, they became some of the most stable institutions in Europe. Importantly, they also shaped time. Calendars organized labor and rest. Rituals marked transitions. In a world without centralized scheduling, this shared sense of rhythm mattered deeply. It synchronized communities without requiring administration. Education, though limited, persisted in focused forms. Literacy survived where it served purpose. Records were kept for land, donation, and law. Texts were copied not for curiosity, but necessity. Knowledge became careful, conservative, and durable. This conservatism is often misunderstood. From a modern perspective, it appears as stagnation. But within the constraints of scarcity, it was a rational strategy. Innovation carried risk. Reliability preserved life. Change occurred, but it was incremental and tested through use rather than theory. The material culture of this period reflects this mindset. Buildings were modest but solid. Tools were designed for repair. Clothing emphasized durability. Nothing was disposable. Objects accumulated history through use. These choices shaped values. Patience was learned early. Waste was discouraged. Time was not something to be optimized, but inhabited. Life moved at the pace of necessity rather than ambition. Against this background, the Roman past became increasingly abstract. Ruins were familiar features of the landscape, but their origins were often unclear. Stories attached to them shifted over time. Rome transformed from a historical reality into a symbolic past, representing order, authority, and a lost age of scale. This symbolic Rome influenced aspiration without dictating practice. New rulers borrowed its language. New laws echoed its forms. But daily life remained grounded in local reality. The empire became a reference, not a roadmap. This distance allowed societies to move forward without the burden of restoration. Rather than attempting to rebuild what could not be sustained, communities focused on what could endure. They invested in relationships, land, and tradition. They built slowly, repaired often, and planned within limits. Over time, this produced a world that was quieter, but not weaker. The strength lay in redundancy. Many small systems replaced one large one. Failure in one place did not doom the whole. Recovery was slow but possible. This is the deeper lesson of Rome's long aftermath. Collapse did not lead to emptiness. It led to redistribution. Complexity was reduced, but resilience increased. The world became less impressive, but more survivable. For modern Tier 1 audiences, this lesson resonates quietly. It suggests that continuity does not require grandeur, that meaning persists without spectacle, that societies can contract without disappearing. The post-Roman centuries remind us that history is not a sequence of peaks and endings. It is a long negotiation between scale and sustainability. Rome reached extraordinary heights. Its successors learned how to live without them. And in that learning, a new kind of civilization took shape. Unplanned, uncelebrated, but enduring. By the 11th century, the world shaped in Rome's absence had begun to display a quiet confidence. It was not confident in expansion or conquest, but in repetition. Customs were known. Obligations were understood. The boundaries of life were clear, even if they were narrow. People no longer compared their circumstances to an imperial past. That past had receded too far to serve as a practical measure. Instead, communities judged success by continuity, by whether fields were planted, disputes resolved, and families sustained from one generation to the next. This stability was not uniform, nor was it guaranteed. Famine, disease, and conflict still interrupted lives. But the response to these disruptions had become standardized through habit. Communities stored grain when possible. Neighbors shared labor in crisis. Religious institutions organized relief. Recovery was slow, but expected. Expectation itself had changed. The Roman world had assumed growth as normal. Roads would be repaired. Cities would expand. Authority would intervene. In the post-Roman world, continuity replaced growth as the baseline. Anything beyond survival was a bonus, not a promise. This shift profoundly altered social relationships. Wealth, where it existed, was displayed less through monument and more through obligation. Patronage mattered. Generosity created loyalty. Hoarding resources carried social risk. Reputation depended on how one acted in scarcity, not abundance. Landholding reflected this logic. Ownership was meaningful only if land could be worked and defended. Estates fragmented through inheritance. Boundaries were renegotiated through use rather than decree. The landscape became a record of accumulated decisions rather than centralized planning. Paths followed habit. Fields followed memory. Settlements followed water and shelter. These patterns produced a geography of familiarity. Travelers recognized the signs of habitation not through uniform architecture, but through function. A mill by a stream, a church on a rise, a market near a crossing. These markers were repeated across regions, creating a shared but decentralized cultural landscape. Communication across distance improved slowly. Pilgrimage routes connected communities. Trade networks re-emerged along rivers and coasts. News traveled unevenly, but it traveled. Ideas spread through contact rather than proclamation. Influence moved with people, not policy. As contact increased, difference became more visible. Languages diverged further. Customs varied more sharply by region. Law was increasingly local. Yet this diversity did not produce fragmentation alone. It also produced exchange. Practices were borrowed, adapted, and localized. This gradual recombination marked a new phase. The post-Roman world was no longer simply surviving. It was reorganizing. Slowly, cautiously, without central direction, it began to build complexity again, but of a different kind than Rome's. Instead of uniformity, it favored adaptability. Institutions remained small enough to respond to local needs. Authority remained close enough to be questioned. Failure remained contained. These limits constrained ambition, but they protected against total collapse. Memory continued to shape behavior. Stories of past hardship discouraged excess. Ruins reminded people of impermanence. Tradition warned against overreach. The Roman past functioned as a cautionary presence, respected but distant. In this way, history became moral rather than instructional. The lesson was not how to rebuild empire, but how to avoid its vulnerabilities. Scale invited fragility. Complexity required maintenance. Distance weakened accountability. These lessons were not written as theory. They were embedded in practice. Over generations, people learned what could be sustained without guarantees. They learned how to live with uncertainty as a condition rather than a crisis. They learned to value resilience over reach. This learning did not prevent future expansions. It shaped how they occurred. When larger political structures eventually re-emerged, they did so cautiously, layered atop local systems rather than replacing them entirely. The memory of Rome lingered as both inspiration and warning. For those living in this middle world, neither Roman nor modern life felt settled in its limits. They did not imagine themselves as transitional. They did not sense that they were laying foundations for something larger. They lived within inherited structures and adapted them as needed. History, for them, was not moving toward a goal. It was repeating, adjusting, and continuing. This perspective is essential to understanding the true legacy of Rome's decline. The empire did not fail and vanish. It transformed the scale at which life was organized. It taught subsequent societies how to exist without central certainty. And in doing so, it reshaped Western history more deeply than any single conquest or reform. The quiet centuries that followed Rome were not empty. They were formative. They taught endurance without grandeur, meaning without monument, and continuity without command. From this slow, patient world, later complexity would rise, not suddenly, not deliberately, but through accumulation. And when it did, it would carry with it the memory of an empire that once believed permanence could be built in stone. By the 12th century, the long world shaped after Rome had entered a phase that felt neither experimental nor fragile. It was still constrained, still local, still uneven, but it possessed confidence born from repetition. Generations had lived and died within its limits. Those limits were no longer experienced as loss. They were experienced as structure. The past now exerted influence less through memory and more through habit. Children learned what adults practiced. Customs were absorbed through participation rather than instruction. Social order was not explained. It was enacted daily through labor, worship, and exchange. Continuity no longer depended on conscious preservation. It depended on routine. This routine shaped expectations about authority. Power was no longer imagined as distant or absolute. It was immediate and conditional. Leaders were expected to listen, arbitrate, and protect. When they failed, their authority weakened visibly. Legitimacy rested on performance rather than position. This did not eliminate hierarchy. It reshaped it. Status existed, but it was embedded in obligation. Those with resources were expected to use them in ways that reinforced stability. Patronage was not generosity alone. It was maintenance. A leader who neglected this role risked isolation. Such arrangements limited rapid accumulation of power. Without centralized enforcement, dominance required constant negotiation. This slowed expansion, but it also prevented sudden collapse. Power that grew too quickly attracted resistance. Balance was preserved not through ideology, but through friction. Economic life reflected similar principles. Markets expanded reports of reliability rather than opportunity. Merchants favored routes that were predictable, not merely profitable. Contracts rested on reputation more than enforcement. Failure traveled quickly through word of mouth. Trust was capital. This created economies that were conservative but resilient. Production remained primarily local. Long-distance trade supplemented rather than replaced regional supply. Scarcity encouraged diversification rather than specialization. Communities avoided dependence on single sources where possible. Time continued to be experienced as cyclical. Agricultural rhythms governed labor. Religious calendars structured rest. Life moved through repetition rather than progression. The future was imagined as the continuation of known patterns, not transformation into unknown forms. This outlook influenced attitudes toward innovation. Change was accepted when it improved reliability. It was resisted when it threatened balance. New tools spread slowly, tested through use rather than theory. Adoption depended on collective judgment rather than individual ambition. From a modern viewpoint, this caution can appear limiting. Yet, within an environment shaped by uncertainty, it was rational. Innovation without safety nets carried risk not only for individuals, but for entire communities. Stability was a shared responsibility. Material culture reinforced this ethic. Buildings emphasized durability. Repairs were preferred over replacement. Objects accumulated value through longevity rather than novelty. Craftsmanship focused on function. Beauty existed, but it was restrained. This restraint shaped emotional life. Ambition was moderated. Expectation was managed. Satisfaction derived from continuity rather than achievement. Loss was anticipated and absorbed rather than treated as anomaly. Such emotional discipline was not universal, nor was it idealized. It was learned through experience. The Roman past, by this point, had become almost mythic. Ruins were interpreted through legend. Ancient roads were used without knowledge of their builders. Latin phrases survived in prayer and law long after comprehension faded. Rome was no longer history. It was presence without narrative. This abstraction mattered. It allowed societies to inherit without imitating. Rome's scale was admired but not pursued. Its authority was referenced but not replicated. Its memory functioned as a horizon, not a destination. In this way, the collapse of Rome continued to shape behavior centuries later, not through trauma, but through caution. The absence of empire taught limits. It demonstrated the cost of overextension. It revealed the fragility of systems that rely on constant expansion. These lessons were never articulated as theory. They were embedded in choices about land, labor, authority, and time. They shaped a civilization that valued endurance over dominance. For those living within it, life felt grounded. The world was knowable. Its dangers were familiar. Its expectations were clear. People did not imagine themselves as living between eras. They lived within one that felt complete. This sense of completeness is often overlooked. Modern narratives frame these centuries as transitional, but to those experiencing them, they were not a bridge. They were home. This matters because it reframes how historical change occurs. Transformation does not always announce itself. It accumulates quietly until a new normal feels permanent. The Roman world ended not because people abandoned it, but because another way of living became sufficient. By the time larger political structures began to reemerge, they did so within this framework. They adapted to existing rhythms rather than replacing them. They layered authority onto habit. They expanded cautiously, aware, whether consciously or not, of the cost of excess. The memory of Rome lingered as background knowledge, respected, distant, instructive in its absence. The true legacy of Rome's fall, then, was not decline, but recalibration. It taught subsequent societies how to live without guarantees, how to build meaning within limits, and how to value continuity over spectacle. This recalibration shaped Western history as deeply as any conquest. It slowed ambition, tempered scale, privileged endurance, and in doing so, it created a world capable of lasting, not because it was powerful, but because it was careful. By the 13th century, the world that had grown in Rome's long shadow possessed a mature sense of itself. It was no longer defined by what it lacked, nor by what it remembered imperfectly. It was defined by what it practiced reliably. The rhythms of life, refined across generations, had become second nature. People understood their place not through abstract identity, but through participation. To belong was to contribute. To contribute was to endure. Social bonds were reinforced daily through shared labor, mutual dependence, and repeated exchange. This created communities that were inward-looking, yet deeply interconnected through habit and necessity. Urban life, where it existed, reflected this balance. Towns were modest in scale but purposeful. Walls defined boundaries. Markets concentrated exchange. Guilds regulated craft and training. These institutions did not aim for growth beyond capacity. They aimed for stability within limits. Rules were conservative by design. They protected quality, restrained competition, and preserved trust. Innovation occurred within frameworks that prioritized reliability over speed. This restrained pace reduced volatility. It also reduced inequality in ways that large, unregulated systems often could not. Authority within these towns was layered. Local councils managed daily affairs. Regional powers asserted oversight. Religious institutions provided moral reference. None operated alone. Power was shared, negotiated, and contested continuously. This friction slowed decision-making, but it also prevented unilateral control. In this environment, memory functioned as regulation. Past failures shaped present caution. Stories of famine, disorder, or abuse of power circulated as warnings. These narratives were not historical analysis. They were social tools. They shaped expectations and constrained behavior. The Roman past, though distant, still influenced these narratives. It represented a time of immense coordination and ambition. Its remnants, roads, laws, language, were visible reminders of what scale could achieve. But they also hinted at cost. The absence of Rome's central authority served as a reminder that complexity demands maintenance. This awareness shaped institutional design. New structures favored redundancy over efficiency. Multiple authorities overlapped. Responsibilities were shared. Failure in one area could be absorbed by others. Systems were not optimized for peak performance. They were optimized for survival. This philosophy extended into economic life. Credit existed, but cautiously. Risk was distributed through partnerships. Long-distance ventures were undertaken, but rarely without safeguards. Merchants valued reputation as highly as profit. Loss was accepted as possibility, not anomaly. Such caution limited explosive growth, but it also limited catastrophic collapse. The experience of Rome's disappearance had left a deep, if unspoken, impression. Systems that grow faster than their capacity to sustain themselves invite instability. The post-Roman world internalized this lesson not through theory, but through habit. Time itself was understood differently. The future was not imagined as open-ended progress. It was imagined as continuity shaped by inheritance. Decisions were evaluated for their effect on descendants, not for immediate return. This long view discouraged excess. Religious thought reinforced this orientation. Teachings emphasized stewardship, restraint, and responsibility. Moral worth was associated with care rather than conquest. While not universally practiced, these ideals influenced social norms and expectations. Material culture reflected the same values. Architecture emphasized solidity. Tools were made to last. Clothing was repaired repeatedly. Waste carried social stigma. Objects accumulated meaning through use rather than novelty. These practices created emotional stability. People expected difficulty. They anticipated loss. Yet they also trusted in recovery. This balance between acceptance and persistence defined the psychological landscape of the age. Importantly, this was not a world without aspiration. Art, learning, and exploration continued, but they unfolded within boundaries shaped by experience. Ambition was tempered by memory. Curiosity was guided by caution. When larger political entities expanded during this period, they did so incrementally. They integrated existing local structures rather than replacing them. Authority layered rather than centralized. Governance adapted to habit. Expansion occurred through negotiation as much as force. This incremental approach contrasted sharply with Rome's earlier model. Instead of imposing uniform systems across vast territories, post-Roman polities tolerated variation. Law differed by region. Custom held authority. Unity was partial and flexible. This flexibility proved durable. It allowed societies to absorb shocks without unraveling, permitted reform without rupture, created space for diversity without disintegration. From a modern perspective, this world can appear constrained, yet its constraints were the source of its endurance. Limits were not obstacles, they were safeguards. The Roman Empire had sought permanence through scale. Its successors sought continuity through balance. Both approaches shaped history, but in different ways. The centuries following Rome's fall demonstrate that survival does not require constant growth. It requires alignment between ambition and capacity. This alignment was learned slowly, through loss and adaptation. By the time new forms of complexity emerged, they were built upon a foundation that valued restraint. The memory of Rome, distant, abstract, and instructive, hovered as a silent influence. It did not dictate action. It framed possibility. And in this framing, the post-Roman world achieved something Rome itself could not. It endured without believing itself permanent. That humility, born of experience, shaped the course of Western history long after the ruins had faded into the landscape. By the 14th century, the long adjustment that followed Rome's disappearance had produced a world deeply accustomed to living within constraints. These constraints were no longer experienced as inherited limits from a fallen empire, but as the natural boundaries of life itself. People did not feel restricted by them. They felt oriented by them. What mattered most was predictability. Not certainty, but expectation. The expectation that seasons would return, that obligations would be honored, that disruption, when it came, would eventually pass. This confidence did not come from strength or abundance. It came from repetition, from having survived difficulty before. The social fabric of this world was dense. Every individual existed within overlapping networks of responsibility. Family, neighbors, parish, craft, and lordship. These ties were not abstract. They were enforced daily through labor, ritual, and shared memory. To withdraw from them was to lose protection as well as identity. Such density created friction, but it also created resilience. When one connection failed, others compensated. Support was imperfect, but rarely absent. No single institution carried the full burden of stability. It was distributed across relationships. This distribution was the lasting legacy of Rome's absence. Where the empire had concentrated responsibility in central authority, the post-Roman world dispersed it. No one expected a distant power to resolve every problem. Resolution began locally and expanded outward only when necessary. This logic shaped responses to crisis. When harvests failed or disease spread, communities relied first on stored resources, mutual aid, and religious charity. Appeals to higher authority were made, but without expectation of rescue. Survival depended on preparation and cooperation more than intervention. This attitude tempered despair. People accepted vulnerability as a condition of life rather than a failure of governance. Suffering was not proof that the system had collapsed. It was evidence that the system was human. Such realism influenced how power was perceived. Authority was respected, but rarely idealized. Leaders were judged by their conduct in difficulty, not by their promises. Legitimacy rested on reliability, not rhetoric. This expectation constrained excess and punished neglect. The memory of Rome lingered faintly in this skepticism. The empire had promised order, security, and continuity, and then it had withdrawn. Its absence taught later societies to moderate belief in permanence. Structures were valued, but never fully trusted. This cautious trust extended into economic life. Markets expanded gradually. Credit was extended carefully. Risk was shared. Prosperity was welcomed, but not assumed. People prepared for loss even in times of plenty. This preparedness shaped cultural expression. Art emphasized continuity rather than innovation. Architecture echoed familiar forms. Music and ritual repeated known patterns. Creativity existed, but it operated within inherited frameworks. This does not mean stagnation. Change continued, but it moved along established channels. New ideas were absorbed slowly, tested through use, and adapted to local context. Sudden transformation was rare and often resisted. Time itself reinforced this pace. Life was measured not by milestones of progress, but by cycles of return. Birth followed death. Planting followed harvest. Generations replaced one another within recognizable patterns. In such a world, history felt close. The past was not distant or abstract. It lived in fields shaped by centuries of labor, in paths worn by repetition, in walls built from reused stone. People encountered history not through texts, but through environment. Rome existed in this environment as residue. Its roads still guided movement. Its materials formed new buildings. Its language echoed in prayer and law. Yet it no longer demanded interpretation, simply remained. This presence without authority was instructive. It demonstrated that systems could outlast their intentions, that influence could persist without control, that legacy did not require continuity of power. For those living centuries later, Rome was not a cautionary tale told aloud. It was a quiet example embedded in landscape and practice. This embedded memory shaped restraint. Ambition was filtered through experience. Expansion was undertaken carefully. Complexity was added incrementally. The fear was not of change, but of imbalance. The Roman Empire had shown what imbalance could cost. Its scale had produced extraordinary coordination and extraordinary fragility. This collapse had been slow, but its consequences had been permanent. The societies that followed did not articulate this lesson as theory. They lived it. They built systems that could shrink as well as grow. They favored redundancy over efficiency. They accepted imperfection in exchange for endurance. This approach did not prevent future crises, but it ensured that crises were survivable. The world that emerged after Rome was not designed. It was learned through loss, adaptation, and time. Its greatest strength was not innovation or ambition, but memory translated into habit. And it was this habitual restraint, carried quietly across generations, that allowed Western society to persist long after the marble and banners of empire. By the 15th century, the long centuries that followed Rome's disappearance had shaped a civilization that understood itself through limits rather than possibilities. This understanding was not pessimistic. It was practical. People no longer expected the world to expand endlessly or improve automatically. They expected it to persist, provided it was treated with care. What endured most strongly was not a political system, but a way of thinking. Life was approached as something maintained rather than mastered. Stability was an achievement, not a default condition. Every generation inherited not only land and tools, but obligations to preserve what worked and avoid what had failed before. These obligations were rarely written. They were embedded in custom, ritual, and memory. They shaped decisions about marriage, inheritance, labor, and authority. They determined how much risk was acceptable and how much ambition was wise. In this world, continuity carried moral weight. To disrupt without necessity was considered dangerous. Change required justification. Innovation had to demonstrate benefit not only to individuals, but to the community as a whole. This standard slowed transformation, but it also protected cohesion. The Roman past still hovered faintly in the background of these judgments. Its ruins remained visible. Its language survived in fragments. Its institutions were referenced selectively. Yet Rome itself no longer represented a goal. It represented a reminder that scale could be impressive but unstable, that complexity demanded constant care, that systems built for expansion could struggle to endure contraction. These lessons were not taught explicitly. They were absorbed through generations of living within smaller systems that worked, through observing how local governance, shared labor, and layered authority created survivable societies. As a result, power was approached cautiously. Leaders were expected to consult, negotiate, and compromise. Authority was legitimate only as long as it aligned with custom and necessity. Excess provoked resistance not because it was immoral, but because it was risky. This risk awareness shaped responses to opportunity. When new trade routes emerged or technologies appeared, adoption was careful. Communities weighed benefit against disruption. Growth was accepted when it reinforced stability, not when it threatened balance. This restraint explains why change during these centuries often appears slow. But slow change was not the same as no change. Population increased. Trade expanded. Knowledge accumulated. Institutions grew more complex. Yet all of this occurred within frameworks designed to absorb shock rather than maximize output. The post-Roman world had learned that survival required margin. Margin in resources, margin in authority, margin in expectation. These margins allowed societies to bend without breaking. Time reinforced this lesson. Generations lived and died without witnessing dramatic transformation. This continuity fostered patience. People planned for heirs rather than outcomes. They invested in durability rather than speed. This orientation toward time shaped cultural expression. Stories emphasized endurance over triumph. Moral instruction focused on responsibility rather than ambition. Success was measured in survival, not conquest. In such a world, the absence of empire was no longer felt as loss. It was simply the condition of life. The Roman Empire had once promised order through scale. Its successors found order through restraint. They accepted that no system could guarantee stability forever. What mattered was the ability to adapt when guarantees failed. This acceptance created a particular kind of confidence. Not confidence in power, but confidence in process. In the belief that even when systems weakened, people could reorganize. That even when structures failed, habits could sustain life. This belief was not abstract. It was grounded in centuries of experience. Communities had watched roads decay and still found paths. They had seen authorities withdraw and still govern themselves. They had reused ruins and built new meanings atop old stone. History, in this sense, was not something that happened to them. It was something they lived within. The Roman Empire's greatest legacy was not what it built, but what its absence taught. It taught later societies how to exist without assuming permanence, how to value balance over dominance, how to accept limits without surrendering purpose. These lessons did not prevent future ambition, but they shaped how ambition was pursued. Expansion returned cautiously. Complexity reemerged gradually. New systems grew atop old habits rather than replacing them entirely. Memory tempered design. The world that eventually moved toward modernity carried this inheritance quietly. It did not remember Rome clearly. It remembered restraint. And that restraint, born from centuries of adaptation after empire, became one of the most durable foundations of Western civilization. Not because it inspired greatness, but because it made addition possible without collapse. As the centuries turned toward the early modern world, the habits formed after Rome's disappearance remained deeply embedded, even as conditions slowly changed. New opportunities emerged, trade widened, knowledge traveled farther. Yet beneath these developments lay an older understanding, shaped by long experience, that endurance mattered more than momentum. People had learned to live with uncertainty without being defined by it. This did not mean resignation. It meant calibration. Expectations were set carefully. Plans were made with contingency in mind. Growth was pursued, but rarely without safeguards. The memory of fragility, transmitted through custom rather than instruction, continued to influence judgment. What distinguished this inherited mindset was its realism. Life was assumed to include disruption. Stability was not taken for granted. This assumption encouraged preparation rather than denial. It fostered a culture that valued storage, redundancy, and shared responsibility. Even as new institutions appeared, they absorbed this logic. Administrative systems layered themselves atop local practices. Written records expanded, but did not erase memory. Central authority grew, but relied on cooperation rather than replacement. Change occurred through addition, not substitution. This layering prevented rupture. When pressure increased through population growth, economic strain, or political ambition, the system adjusted rather than shattered. Tensions surfaced, but they were managed through negotiation as often as through force. The Roman past remained present, but increasingly indirect. It appeared in legal terminology, architectural forms, and inherited boundaries. Yet its meaning had shifted. Rome no longer symbolized a world to be restored. It symbolized a world that had once believed itself complete and learned otherwise. This quiet lesson continued to shape restraint. Leaders hesitated before overreach. Communities resisted sudden transformation. Institutions evolved slowly, guided by precedent. Innovation was welcomed when it strengthened reliability, not when it promised novelty alone. Such caution can be misunderstood as fear. In reality, it was experience. Generations had lived through the consequences of systems that could not adapt downward. They had learned that strength without flexibility becomes vulnerability, that size without resilience invites collapse. This understanding influenced how people imagined the future. The future was not a blank space for invention. It was an extension of inherited patterns. Responsibility flowed forward as well as backward. Decisions were weighed for their long-term effect on continuity. This long view shaped moral reasoning. Actions were judged not only by intention, but by consequence. Excess was criticized not for ambition, but for instability. Moderation was praised not for humility, but for sustainability. The emotional tone of this world reflected these values. Anxiety existed, but it was tempered by familiarity. Loss was anticipated, but not dramatized. Recovery was expected, even if slow. Hope was quiet rather than triumphant. This emotional restraint supported social cohesion. People did not rely on constant reassurance from authority. They relied on habit, on shared knowledge of how things had been done before, on confidence that adaptation was possible because it had already occurred many times. In this way, the absence of Rome continued to act as a stabilizing force, not through nostalgia or fear, but through precedent. The memory, often unspoken, that systems can fail and life can continue regardless. This awareness prevented blind faith in permanence. It encouraged humility in design. It favored institutions that could shrink as well as grow. It valued practices that could be sustained under pressure. The result was a civilization that moved carefully, not slowly in all things, but deliberately. It understood the cost of speed. It recognized the fragility of complexity, preferred balance to brilliance. The Roman Empire had once embodied confidence in expansion. Its successors embodied confidence in endurance. This confidence did not produce monuments on the same scale. It produced something less visible but more lasting, habits that allowed societies to absorb change without losing coherence. History often remembers Rome for its grandeur and its fall. Less often does it recognize what followed as a long education in limits. That education shaped how Western societies approached growth, authority, and risk for centuries afterward. It influenced not only institutions but expectations, not only laws but attitudes. The quiet centuries after Rome taught that survival is not achieved through dominance alone. It is achieved through adjustment, through patience, through the willingness to live within boundaries while preparing for change. This lesson, learned slowly and without ceremony, became one of the most enduring inheritances of the post-Roman world. And it remains relevant not because it offers certainty, but because it acknowledges uncertainty as permanent. As the early modern period gradually emerged, the habits shaped in the centuries after Rome did not disappear. They softened, adapted, and merged with new possibilities, but they continued to influence how people understood stability, authority, and change. Even as horizons widened, the older instinct toward restraint remained close at hand. This persistence is easy to overlook. History often emphasizes moments of acceleration, new technologies, expanding trade, growing states. Yet beneath these developments lay a cultural memory formed in an age when survival depended on moderation. That memory did not resist change outright, filtered it. New systems were judged not only by what they promised, but by how they behaved under strain. This filtering shaped institutional growth. As administrations became more formal, they retained layered authority. Local practices were rarely erased. Instead, they were incorporated. Central power learned to coexist with custom, not because it lacked strength, but because experience had shown that replacement invited resistance and fragility. This coexistence created a balance between reach and depth. Laws extended farther, but enforcement remained local. Decisions were standardized, but interpretation varied. Uniformity was pursued cautiously, aware that diversity had once provided resilience when larger systems failed. Economic life reflected the same balance. Markets expanded beyond regional boundaries, yet reliance on local production persisted. Trade offered opportunity, but self-sufficiency remained a safeguard. Communities did not abandon the habits that had sustained them through uncertainty simply because new options appeared. Risk was calculated rather than embraced. Investment grew, but it was tempered by diversification. Credit expanded, but it was grounded in reputation. Failure was anticipated, planned for, and absorbed where possible. Prosperity was welcomed, but not assumed to be permanent. This mindset moderated optimism. Hope existed, but it was restrained by memory. The world had once seemed stable and then proven otherwise. That lesson lingered, shaping expectation even when conditions improved. Cultural expression carried this awareness. Art and literature explored themes of impermanence, balance, and responsibility. Grandeur was admired, but often accompanied by reflection on its cost. The idea that all things pass was not abstract philosophy. It was inherited experience. The Roman past continued to occupy a quiet place in this reflection. Its ruins were no longer central symbols, but they remained familiar markers. They reminded observers that systems could endure physically while dissolving institutionally. That legacy could persist without control. This awareness influenced how permanence was imagined. Buildings were constructed to last, but not to dominate. Institutions aimed for continuity rather than immutability. Change was expected, but it was managed incrementally. The concept of progress itself was shaped by this restraint. Advancement was not defined as constant expansion. It was defined as improved reliability. Better harvests, safer trade, more predictable governance. These were valued more than scale for its own sake. Time was still experienced as layered. The past was not sealed off from the present. It remained visible in landscapes, customs, and language. People lived among traces of earlier worlds, learning implicitly that history did not vanish when systems changed. This layered sense of time encouraged humility. No structure was assumed to be final. No success was believed to be permanent. Stability was understood as a condition to be maintained, not a state to be achieved once and for all. This humility shaped leadership. Authority was expected to adapt rather than command. Leaders who ignored custom or exceeded capacity faced resistance not as rebellion, but as correction. Power that did not listen was power that weakened itself. The absence of Rome, long internalized, continued to inform these expectations. Its fall had demonstrated that even the most sophisticated systems could outgrow their foundations. That complexity required care. That scale demanded flexibility. These insights were never codified as doctrine. They lived in practice, in how decisions were made, how risks were evaluated, how ambitions were tempered. They formed a background understanding shared across generations. As a result, change in this world often appeared gradual. But gradual change can be profound. Over time, layers accumulated. Institutions grew more complex. Knowledge expanded. connections multiplied. Yet all of this rested on a foundation shaped by centuries of adaptation to life without imperial certainty. The Roman Empire had once offered coherence through command. What followed offered coherence through habit. This difference mattered. Command can impose order quickly, but it struggles with retreat. Habit evolves slowly, but it absorbs loss more easily. The post-Roman world learned this through experience rather than theory. Its inheritance was not unity, but durability. This durability allowed later societies to experiment without collapsing, to expand without forgetting how to contract, to innovate without abandoning caution. In this sense, Rome's greatest contribution to the future was indirect. By disappearing, it taught later worlds how to live without assuming permanence, how to build systems that expected strain, how to value balance over excess. This lesson did not prevent ambition. It shaped it, and it is why the centuries after Rome matter so deeply to understanding the modern world. They reveal that what survives history is not always what shines brightest, but what adjusts most patiently. As the narrative reaches its final movement, the long echo of Rome's disappearance becomes clearer not as an absence, but as a shaping force. Centuries after imperial authority withdrew, the habits formed in its wake continued to influence how societies understood risk, responsibility, and endurance. These habits were no longer consciously linked to Rome. They had become part of the cultural background, assumptions about how the world worked. What endured was a preference for systems that could survive disappointment. Expectations were deliberately modest. Promises were treated cautiously. Authority was respected, but rarely trusted without evidence. This skepticism did not breed paralysis. Produced care. Decisions were weighed, not rushed. Commitments were made with an awareness of their cost. This awareness affected how people related to institutions. Institutions were not expected to be perfect. They were expected to be reparable. When they failed, the response was adjustment rather than abandonment. Replacement occurred slowly, with attention to continuity. Abrupt change was associated with instability, not improvement. This repair-oriented mindset was one of the most enduring legacies of the post-Roman centuries. Communities learned that survival depended less on innovation than on maintenance. Keeping what existed functional mattered more than pursuing what was new. This did not eliminate creativity. It directed it toward reinforcement rather than disruption. Even ambition took on a different character. Ambition was measured by sustainability. Expansion was justified only if it could be supported through lean times. Growth that exceeded capacity was regarded as reckless. These judgments were not ideological. They were practical, shaped by generations who had lived through contraction. The Roman Empire had embodied the opposite assumption. It had trusted scale to solve problems. It had believed that integration could overcome fragility. Its disappearance demonstrated the limits of that belief. Later societies did not reject complexity, but they learned to respect its demands. This respect shaped how knowledge was treated. Learning expanded gradually. Preservation was valued alongside discovery. Old texts were copied not only for content, but for continuity. Memory and innovation coexisted, each moderating the other. This balance was visible in everyday life. Fields were cultivated using inherited methods refined through experience. Tools evolved incrementally. Practices that failed were abandoned quietly. Success was judged by reliability rather than novelty. Time in this world felt layered rather than linear. The past was not sealed behind the present. It lived alongside it. People moved through landscapes shaped by many generations, aware that their own efforts would become part of that layering. This awareness encouraged restraint. One did not build as if nothing had existed before. One added, adjusted, and repaired. This approach fostered a deep sense of continuity. Even as societies changed, they recognized themselves in their predecessors. They did not imagine history as a series of ruptures. They experienced it as accumulation. The Roman past fit naturally into this understanding. It was not mourned continuously, nor was it restored. It was acknowledged, adapted, and absorbed. Its remnants became ordinary features of life. Roads guided movement. Stones formed new walls. Language echoed in law and prayer. Rome became a presence without authority, and that presence was instructive. It reminded people that power could vanish while influence remained, that systems could fail while practices endured, that history did not end when structures collapsed. This understanding shaped emotional resilience. Loss was expected. Change was anticipated. Recovery was assumed to be possible, even if slow. This emotional posture prevented despair from becoming dominant. It also prevented complacency. No arrangement was considered final. No success was taken as permanent. Stability was something to be protected, not presumed. As modernity approached, these habits did not disappear. They were challenged, stretched, and sometimes ignored, but they remained available as reference. When systems expanded rapidly, the memory of restraint lingered as caution. When ambition surged, the experience of collapse tempered confidence. This tension between expansion and endurance would continue to shape history. The Roman Empire's fall was often described as an ending. In reality, it was a lesson taught slowly, unevenly, and without instruction. A lesson learned not through theory, but through living. It taught that permanence is an illusion, but continuity is achievable. That complexity requires care. That scale demands humility. Most importantly, it taught that societies do not need to be invincible to endure. They need to be adaptable. The quiet centuries after Rome demonstrated this truth repeatedly. They showed that life reorganizes itself when guarantees fail, that people rebuild meaning within limits, that endurance is a collective achievement shaped by habit and memory. This is why the slow collapse of Rome remains relevant, not because it warns of sudden disaster, but because it reveals how humans respond when certainty dissolves. It shows how ordinary life continues, adjusts, and persists long after grand structures recede. Rome did not vanish in silence. It faded into background, and in becoming background, it shaped the foreground of everything that followed. This concludes the current clip. As the story settles into its closing horizon, what becomes most striking is not the disappearance of empire, but the persistence of ordinary life. Long after banners fell and administrations dissolved, people continued to wake, work, gather, and rest. History did not pause. It slowed, recalibrated, and carried on at a different pace. This persistence is easy to overlook because it lacks drama. There were no universal turning points felt by all. No shared moment when people recognized that they were living after Rome. Instead, there was adjustment, a road no longer repaired, a tax no longer collected, a title no longer enforced. Each change was small enough to absorb. Together, they reshaped the world. The most profound transformation occurred not in institutions, but in expectation. People ceased to assume that large systems would endure indefinitely. Stability was no longer imagined as a permanent condition delivered from above. It was understood as something produced through daily effort and collective habit. This understanding altered how communities related to authority. Power was valued when it was present and useful, not when it was distant and symbolic. Titles mattered less than actions. Promises mattered less than reliability. Authority was measured in response, not rhetoric. Such attitudes did not arise from ideology. They emerged from experience. The Roman state had once embodied certainty. Its withdrawal taught later societies that certainty could vanish without warning. The response was not rebellion, but recalibration. People learned to anchor their lives in what they could influence directly. Family, land, craft, and custom became the core of stability. These elements were tangible. They could be maintained, repaired, and transmitted. They did not require distant coordination. They survived contraction. Over generations, this focus shaped identity. People define themselves less by political affiliation and more by role and relationship. Identity was local, relational, and layered. Belonging meant participation rather than allegiance. This localization did not isolate communities entirely. Connections persisted through trade, pilgrimage, and shared belief. But these connections were selective. They enhanced life without replacing local foundations. Dependence was balanced. Balance itself became a guiding principle. Not balance as equilibrium without change, but balance as responsiveness. Systems were expected to bend, not break. Excess in one area was corrected by restraint in another. Adaptation was constant, but quiet. This quiet adaptation explains why the post-Roman centuries appear deceptively still. Change occurred beneath the surface. Practices shifted. Boundaries adjusted. Institutions evolved. But because these changes were incremental, they rarely appeared revolutionary. Revolution requires contrast. The post-Roman world avoided sharp contrasts by design. It smoothed transitions. It favored continuity even while transforming. This approach shaped memory. Rather than preserving a single narrative of the past, societies retained fragments. Stories, ruins, phrases, customs. These fragments were not assembled into a coherent history. They were woven into daily life. Rome survived in this form, not as an empire remembered clearly, but as a presence felt vaguely. Its influence was diffuse, its authority absent, its lessons implicit. One of those lessons was restraint. Another was humility. The Roman experience demonstrated that no system, however sophisticated, could guarantee permanence. The centuries that followed internalized this truth. They did not reject ambition, but they distrusted excess. They valued preparation over optimism. This mindset did not eliminate progress. It shaped its character. Progress became cumulative rather than explosive. It emphasized reliability. It favored structures that could endure stress. It allowed complexity to return slowly, supported by experience. When modern institutions eventually emerged, they inherited this background. They did not arise in a vacuum. They were shaped by centuries of living with limits. The memory of Rome's collapse, though faint, informed their design. Even today, echoes remain. Ideas about checks and balances, decentralization, redundancy, and repair reflect long-standing skepticism toward concentrated power. These ideas did not originate solely in theory. They were lived into existence. The fall of Rome is often treated as a warning. In truth, it is also an instruction. It shows that endings are rarely total, that collapse can be gradual, that people adapt without knowing the outcome, that continuity often survives where permanence fails. The Roman Empire ended as a system, but life did not end with it. Life reorganized itself around smaller certainties. It found meaning in repetition. It preserved what mattered and released what could no longer be sustained. This process was not heroic. It was human, and it is why the story of Rome's quiet collapse continues to resonate. Not because it predicts catastrophe, but because it demonstrates resilience without spectacle. It reminds us that history is not only made by those who command systems, but by those who live within their absence. Rome faded, people remained, and in remaining, they shaped the world that followed. As the documentary reaches its final reflection, the meaning of Rome's long disappearance becomes clearer when viewed not through institutions, but through human continuity. What survived was not an empire structure, but an understanding of how life persists when structure weakens. This understanding was never written as doctrine. It was practiced, repeated, and quietly transmitted. The people who lived after Rome did not think of themselves as custodians of a fallen world. They were not preserving ruins out of reverence. They were using what remained because it was useful. Stones were taken because they were already shaped. Roads were followed because they were already there. Language persisted because it still worked. This practical inheritance mattered more than memory. History was not preserved as narrative. It was preserved as function. What endured did so because it fit the conditions of life that followed. What failed to fit was abandoned without ceremony. This process of quiet selection shaped everything. Institutions that demanded constant resources disappeared. Practices that adapted to scarcity remained. Systems that required centralized enforcement faded. Customs that relied on participation survived. Over time, this filtering produced a world suited to uncertainty. The Roman Empire had been built on coordination at scale. Its successors were built on cooperation at depth. Depth proved more durable. Depth meant knowing one's neighbors, understanding local conditions, and relying on shared expectation rather than distant command. It meant accepting limits as normal rather than temporary. It meant measuring success by continuity rather than expansion. These values did not emerge overnight. They were learned through loss, reinforced by repetition, and normalized by time. Generations grew up knowing no other arrangement. What had once been adaptation became tradition. Tradition, in this sense, was not resistance to change. It was accumulated wisdom. It encoded what had worked when guarantees failed. It reminded people which risks were survivable and which were not. It shaped instinct before thought. This instinct guided response to crisis. When disruption came, communities did not wait for solutions from above. They acted locally, adjusted expectations, and relied on relationships. They understood that help might come late or not at all. Preparation mattered more than promise. This realism did not extinguish hope. It grounded it. Hope was placed not in permanence, but in recovery. Not in systems, but in people's ability to reorganize. Not in the absence of difficulty, but in familiarity with it. Such hope is quieter than optimism. It does not announce itself. It endures. This quiet endurance is the true legacy of Rome's collapse. The empire demonstrated what could be built with ambition, coordination, and confidence. Its disappearance demonstrated what was required when those qualities could no longer be sustained. The centuries that followed did not reject Rome's achievements. They absorbed its lessons. They learned that scale must be matched by care, that complexity requires maintenance, that power must adapt or recede, that no system is immune to exhaustion. Most importantly, they learned that life continues even when systems fail. This lesson shaped attitudes toward authority long after Rome. People respected power, but they did not assume it would last. They valued order, but they did not confuse it with permanence. They accepted hierarchy, but they expected accountability. These expectations formed slowly, but they endured. They shaped how later institutions were designed. They influenced ideas about shared responsibility, layered governance, and limits on authority. They informed the belief that stability depends not on strength alone, but on flexibility. The fall of Rome is often framed as tragedy. In truth, it was also a transition into a different kind of wisdom. A wisdom that accepted fragility as part of human systems, that valued repair over replacement, that understood continuity as an achievement rather than an assumption. This wisdom does not promise safety, promises survivability. It does not prevent collapse. It ensures recovery. That is why the Roman story continues to matter, not because it predicts an end, but because it reveals what follows. It shows how people live through uncertainty without naming it as such, how they adapt quietly, how they carry meaning forward without monuments. Rome ended not with silence, but with dispersal. Its influence spread into habit, custom, and background assumption. It ceased to command attention, yet it continued to shape behavior. In that sense, Rome never truly vanished. It became ordinary, and in becoming ordinary, it taught one of history's most enduring lessons, that civilizations are not sustained by their peaks, but by their capacity to live after them. This concludes the next segment of the documentary. As the documentary settles fully into its closing stretch, the long silence after Rome becomes its own form of explanation. The absence of dramatic endings, the lack of finality, and the quiet persistence of daily life reveal something essential about how history actually unfolds. Civilizations rarely end the way they are remembered. They do not vanish in a moment. They thin, they loosen, they recede from certain places while lingering in others. What collapses first is not culture or belief, but coordination. What remains longest is habit. In the Roman world, habit had been shaped by empire, by roads that connected, laws that standardized, and institutions that promised continuity. When those systems weakened, habits adjusted rather than disappeared. People learned to operate without guarantees, to rely on proximity rather than reach. This adjustment did not feel heroic. It felt practical. When a road could no longer be maintained end to end, it was used where it still worked. When currency lost reliability, exchange adapted. When authority withdrew, responsibility redistributed. None of these changes required a declaration. They emerged from use. Over time, this use-based world became normal. Children born generations after Rome's retreat did not experience loss. They experienced familiarity. The structures around them, fields, villages, churches, customs, felt complete. They were not waiting for restoration. They were living within sufficiency. This sufficiency is often misunderstood. It is easy to assume that less complexity means less meaning. Yet meaning does not depend on scale. It depends on coherence. The post-Roman world was coherent within its limits. People knew what was expected of them. They understood their roles. They recognized the rhythms that shaped their lives. Coherence replaced grandeur. In place of vast administration came layered obligation. In place of universal law came negotiated custom. In place of monumental identity came relational belonging. These substitutions did not weaken life. They stabilized it. This stabilization had consequences. It reduced volatility. It slowed change. It moderated ambition. But it also created societies capable of absorbing loss without disintegrating. When hardship came, it was addressed through familiarity rather than panic. This familiarity was built through repetition. Work followed seasons. Worship followed calendars. Relationships followed memory. Life was structured through recurrence rather than novelty. The future was imagined as continuation, not rupture. Such an imagination discourages extremes. It does not eliminate conflict or suffering, but it frames them as events within a longer pattern. This framing reduces despair. It encourages patience. It sustains effort even when outcomes are uncertain. The Roman Empire had once offered a different imagination. Promised order through reach, stability through control, permanence through scale. Its decline demonstrated the cost of those promises when conditions changed. What followed was not a rejection of order, but a redefinition of it. Order no longer meant uniformity. It meant predictability. It no longer meant command. It meant coordination. It no longer meant permanence. It meant repair. Repair became a central activity. Buildings were repaired. Tools were repaired. Relationships were repaired. Authority itself was repaired through negotiation and compromise. This repair culture did not seek perfection. It sought functionality. Function mattered more than form. This orientation explains why so much of Rome survived materially but changed meaning. Stones were reused, roads redirected, laws simplified, language transformed. Continuity existed without fidelity. Rome became raw material, not an ideal to restore, but a resource to adapt. This adaptive inheritance shaped later developments in subtle ways. It encouraged modular systems, systems that could be altered without collapsing entirely. It favored layered governance over centralized control. It valued redundancy over efficiency. These preferences did not arise from theory. They arose from experience. They reflected lessons learned by living through contraction. Lessons about what fails first and what lasts longest. Lessons about the dangers of overextension and the virtues of margin. Margin, the space to absorb shock, became essential. Communities stored surplus when possible. Institutions avoided single points of failure. Authority was divided. Expectations were restrained. These margins allowed life to continue even when conditions worsened. This approach did not prevent suffering. It made suffering survivable. That distinction is crucial. History often celebrates success measured by expansion. The post-Roman centuries reveal another measure: endurance, the ability to continue without collapsing into chaos, the capacity to adapt without losing coherence. Endurance is quieter than triumph. It does not announce itself. It accumulates unnoticed. It is recognized only in retrospect, when survival itself becomes remarkable. The fall of Rome is remembered because of what was lost. The centuries after matter because of what was learned. They demonstrate that systems are temporary, but practices endure. That coordination can fail, but cooperation persists. That meaning does not require monument or mandate. Life reorganizes itself around what remains. This reorganization is not planned. It is lived. People adjust expectations. They redefine success. They find stability in repetition. They invest in what they can maintain. Over time, these choices shape entire civilizations. The modern world inherits not only Rome's ambition, but its aftermath. It inherits roads and laws, but also skepticism toward permanence. It carries both confidence in organization and awareness of fragility. That awareness is Rome's final gift, not the warning of collapse, but the demonstration of continuity. Rome shows how systems end. Its aftermath shows how people continue. And in that continuation, in fields cultivated, paths followed, habits repeated, the deeper story of history unfolds, not as spectacle, but as persistence. As the final layers of this long story settle into place, it becomes clear that Rome's most lasting influence was not architectural, legal, or military. It was psychological. The centuries lived after its withdrawal shaped how people understood uncertainty itself. Uncertainty ceased to be an interruption. It became a condition. When the empire still functioned, uncertainty was treated as a problem to be solved. Disruption demanded response from authority. Disorder required correction. The assumption was that stability was normal and instability an exception. After Rome, that assumption dissolved. Stability became something provisional, something achieved through effort and cooperation, not something guaranteed by structure. This shift altered how people interpreted events. Hardship was no longer evidence of failure. It was part of the expected landscape of life. This expectation did not numb emotion, clarified it. Fear existed, but it was tempered by familiarity. Loss was painful, but not incomprehensible. Recovery was slow, but imaginable. People learned to endure not because they were hardened, but because endurance became routine. Routine is a powerful force. It shapes instinct before thought. It guides behavior without requiring explanation. Over generations, routine becomes culture. Culture becomes assumption. Assumption becomes invisible. By the time larger systems began to re-emerge, this invisible inheritance was already in place. It influenced how new institutions were received. Grand promises were met with caution. Ambitious plans were evaluated for sustainability. Authority was accepted but rarely idealized. Memory, even when unspoken, shaped judgment. This memory was not historical in the modern sense. It was experiential. People did not recall dates or causes. They recalled consequences. They remembered that systems could retreat, that protections could vanish, that life continued anyway. This experiential memory encouraged diversification. Communities avoided dependence on single structures. Power was distributed. Responsibility was shared. No one element was allowed to become indispensable. Fragility was managed through overlap. Overlap created resilience. When one support weakened, another compensated. When one authority failed, another mediated. This redundancy slowed efficiency, but it prevented collapse. Efficiency had once been Rome's strength. Its roads, laws, and logistics minimized friction. But efficiency also reduced tolerance for failure. When coordination weakened, the system had little flexibility. The post-Roman world chose the opposite trade-off. It accepted inefficiency in exchange for adaptability, tolerated duplication. It allowed variation. It valued systems that could function imperfectly. This preference shaped long-term development. Institutions grew in layers rather than leaps. Authority accumulated gradually. Reform occurred through adjustment rather than replacement. These patterns limited speed, but they preserved continuity. Continuity, in turn, fostered trust. Trust was not placed in permanence, but in process, in the belief that even if structures faltered, people would respond, that repair was possible, that life would reorganize. This trust did not require optimism. It required memory, the memory that life had already continued once before, under conditions of far greater uncertainty, that survival had not depended on restoration, but on adaptation. Rome's absence taught that lesson without instruction. It was learned through fields cultivated without imperial protection, through roads used without maintenance, through customs negotiated without enforcement. Each small success reinforced the belief that continuity did not require command. This belief shaped values. Responsibility was localized. Obligation was personal. Authority was contextual. Identity was relational. These values created societies that were slower to mobilize, but harder to eradicate. They also created a particular emotional tone. Pride existed, but it was moderated. Confidence was quiet. Hope was restrained. The future was approached with preparation rather than expectation. This tone carried forward. Even as technological and economic change accelerated, the inherited instinct toward caution persisted. It surfaced in debates about authority, limits, and balance. It shaped resistance to overreach and concern for sustainability. These instincts did not originate in theory. They were sedimented experience passed not through texts alone, but through practice, through what people did when systems failed, through what they valued when guarantees disappeared. The fall of Rome is often framed as a lesson about collapse, but its deeper lesson is about continuity without certainty. It shows that societies can lose coherence and still function, that people can live meaningful lives without centralized stability, that adaptation does not require awareness of historical significance. Most of those who lived after Rome did not believe they were part of a great transition. They believed they were living ordinary lives. They planted crops. They repaired walls. They raised children. They honored customs. They adjusted expectations. History happened quietly around them. This quiet is what endures. It reminds us that the most powerful forces in history are often invisible at the time. That adaptation is more influential than intention. That endurance shapes the future more reliably than ambition. Rome's collapse did not teach people how to build empires. It taught them how to live without them. And in that lesson, learned slowly, unevenly, and without spectacle, lies one of history's most enduring truths. As this long meditation on Rome's quiet disappearance reaches its final depth, the most revealing insight is not about empires, but about scale. History often privileges scale, how large a system became, how far it reached, how much it controlled. Yet the centuries after Rome demonstrate that scale is not the measure of endurance. Endurance is measured by adaptability. When Rome functioned, it organized life across vast distances. It synchronized law, currency, infrastructure, and authority. This coordination produced extraordinary achievements. But it also created dependency. When coordination weakened, the effects were felt everywhere at once. The post-Roman world learned to live without synchronization. Life became asynchronous. Different regions adapted at different speeds. Some retained fragments of Roman order longer than others. Some reorganized quickly, some slowly. This lack of uniformity was not a flaw. It was a safeguard. Asynchrony prevented total failure. When one region struggled, another might remain stable. When one practice failed, another could replace it. There was no single center whose collapse doomed the whole. Complexity was distributed rather than concentrated. This distribution shaped how people understood belonging. Belonging was not tied to a vast political identity. It was tied to place, memory, and participation. People belonged where their actions mattered, where their labor was visible, where their absence would be noticed. Such belonging produced responsibility. Responsibility did not flow upward to distant authority. It flowed outward to neighbors and inward to family. This orientation made stability a shared task rather than a delegated one. Shared responsibility does not eliminate conflict, but it localizes it. Disputes were resolved close to where they occurred. Consequences were immediate. Reconciliation mattered because relationships were ongoing. There was little room for abstraction. This closeness shaped moral judgment. Right and wrong were not primarily legal categories. They were relational ones. Actions were evaluated by their effect on trust, cooperation, and continuity. Harm was understood through its impact on shared life. This moral framework was well suited to uncertainty. It did not depend on enforcement alone. It depended on reputation and memory. These forms of regulation are slow, but they are resilient. They survive even when formal systems weaken. The Roman legal tradition had been explicit and codified. What followed was implicit and practiced. This shift did not erase law. Changed its function. Law became reference rather than command. Custom filled the gaps. Flexibility replaced uniformity. Uniformity had once been Rome's strength, but flexibility proved more sustainable. Flexibility allowed societies to adjust to climate, migration, disease, and economic change without systemic collapse. Adjustments were imperfect, but they were cumulative. Over time, small changes produced stable patterns. These patterns felt timeless to those living within them. They did not experience their world as fragile. They experienced it as familiar. Fragility is often visible only in retrospect, when contrasted with what came before or after. For those living centuries after Rome, their world was not a remnant. It was complete. They did not feel diminished by the absence of empire. They felt oriented by the presence of routine. Their lives had shape, meaning, and expectation. These did not require monumental institutions. This realization challenges modern assumptions. It suggests that well-being is not proportional to scale. That meaning does not require complexity. That coordination, while powerful, is not the only path to order. The Roman collapse teaches this indirectly. It shows that when large systems recede, smaller systems intensify. They become denser, more relational, more immediate. They demand more participation but offer more belonging. This trade-off is rarely acknowledged. Empires reduce friction by standardizing life. Their absence increases friction, but also increases agency. People must negotiate more, decide more, and adapt more. This is demanding, but it is also empowering. The post-Roman centuries were demanding. Life was harder in many ways. Resources were scarcer. Security was uneven. Opportunity was limited. Yet within these constraints, people exercised judgment constantly. They shaped their world incrementally. This incremental shaping is how history often moves. Not through decisive breaks, but through accumulation of small choices. choices about what to keep, what to abandon, what to reuse, and what to redefine. Rome's ruins were reused not because of nostalgia, but because they were practical. Stones already cut, roads already laid, language already shared. This pragmatism preserved continuity without preserving power. Continuity without power is a subtle condition. It allows influence to persist without command. It allows memory to guide without dictating. Creates space for reinterpretation. Rome persisted in this way, not as an empire but as a resource, a background presence, a set of assumptions embedded in habit rather than enforced by authority. This embedded influence is more durable than domination. Domination ends when power withdraws. Embedded influence continues as long as it remains useful. Rome's legacy endured because it could be adapted, not because it could be imposed. This adaptability is the true lesson of its fall. Civilizations do not survive by freezing themselves in time. They survive by allowing themselves to be dismantled and reassembled in new forms. The Roman world was dismantled slowly. Its components were redistributed across centuries of ordinary life. Some pieces were lost, some transformed, some preserved quietly. What emerged was not a lesser world. It was a different one, a world that valued repair over replacement, habit over command, endurance over spectacle. This world laid the groundwork for everything that followed, not through grand design but through accumulated adjustment, not through certainty but through familiarity with uncertainty. And this is why the story of Rome's quiet collapse remains endlessly relevant. Because it does not tell us how civilizations end. It shows us how they live afterward. As this extended reflection continues, the quiet after Rome reveals something that grand narratives often miss. History is shaped less by decisive moments than by the long habits that follow them. The disappearance of imperial authority did not create a vacuum of meaning. It created space in which ordinary practices gained greater importance. When centralized systems withdraw, everyday decisions matter more. Who repairs the fence? Who shares grain in a poor harvest? Who mediates a dispute? These choices, repeated over years and generations, shape social reality more reliably than proclamations or reforms. The post-Roman centuries were defined by this shift from directive order to participatory order. Participatory order is slower. It lacks clarity from a distance. It resists summary, but it is deeply rooted. It depends on people knowing one another, remembering past actions, and anticipating future encounters. In such a system, reputation becomes currency. Memory becomes law. This is why trust mattered so intensely. Trust reduced the cost of uncertainty. It allowed cooperation without constant enforcement. It made promises meaningful even when no authority guaranteed them. Trust took time to build and could be lost quickly, which encouraged restraint. Restraint became a form of intelligence. It guided behavior without requiring explanation. People learned what endangered stability by observing consequences. Excess provoked backlash. Neglect invited disorder. Balance preserved continuity. These lessons were learned locally, but they accumulated broadly. Across regions once bound by Rome, similar patterns emerged, not because of coordination, but because conditions demanded similar solutions. Scarcity rewarded cooperation. Distance rewarded self-sufficiency. Uncertainty rewarded flexibility. The result was convergence without uniformity. Communities differed in custom and language, yet shared underlying assumptions about responsibility, authority, and risk. These shared assumptions created a cultural coherence that did not require political unity. This coherence is often invisible in historical accounts. It does not announce itself in documents or monuments. It appears in practice in how disputes are settled, how resources are shared, how change is introduced. It appears in what people tolerate and what they resist. The Roman collapse accelerated this practical coherence. By removing a central reference point, it forced communities to develop their own standards of sufficiency. What was enough became a local judgment rather than an imperial metric. Prosperity was measured against survival, not expansion. This recalibration reshaped ambition. Ambition did not disappear. It narrowed. People sought security, continuity, and respect rather than dominance. Leadership was valued when it stabilized relationships, not when it extended control. Over time, this orientation produced a distinct political sensibility. Authority was expected to justify itself continuously. Power without service weakened quickly. Legitimacy was relational rather than abstract. This sensibility constrained extremes. Extreme centralization had failed once already. Even when later systems grew larger, they did so with memory of that failure embedded in habit. Authority layered itself atop local structures rather than replacing them. Custom remained influential. Variation was tolerated. This tolerance was not ideological. It was pragmatic. Variation allowed adaptation. When one method failed, another might succeed. Diversity of practice created resilience at scale. Rome had minimized variation to achieve efficiency. Its successors accepted inefficiency to preserve flexibility. This trade-off shaped economic life as well. Production diversified. Dependency was avoided where possible. Communities hedged against loss by spreading risk. Specialization existed, but rarely without backup. Redundancy was valued. Redundancy is costly in the short term, but it is protective in the long term. The post-Roman centuries demonstrate this repeatedly. Systems that appeared less impressive endured longer. Structures that accepted imperfection survived disruption. This endurance altered how people related to time. Time was not something to be conquered or accelerated. It was something to move within. Patience was not a virtue imposed from above. It was a necessity learned through repetition. Patience shaped emotional life. Expectation was moderated. Surprise was reduced. Recovery was assumed to take time. These assumptions did not eliminate suffering, but they contextualized it. Suffering was not interpreted as proof of failure. This interpretation mattered. It prevented despair from becoming systemic. It allowed people to continue investing in their world even when outcomes were uncertain. It sustained effort across generations. Such intergenerational thinking became natural. People worked for futures they would not see. They repaired structures they would not finish. They preserved practices whose value lay in continuity rather than reward. This orientation toward continuity is one of the most profound outcomes of Rome's disappearance. When permanence is no longer assumed, continuity becomes precious. It must be maintained deliberately. This maintenance becomes a shared responsibility. Shared responsibility binds communities. It gives meaning to participation. It transforms ordinary actions into contributions. It anchors identity in practice rather than ideology. The Roman Empire had offered identity through membership in a vast system. Its absence fostered identity through contribution to a smaller one. Neither form is inherently superior, but the latter proved more durable under strain. This durability is not dramatic. It does not produce spectacles or slogans. It reveals itself only over time, in the simple fact that life continues with coherence despite uncertainty. The centuries after Rome are therefore not a story of waiting. They are a story of living without guarantees, living without restoration, living with adjustment as a constant condition. From this living emerged habits that shaped later worlds, habits of caution, repair, balance, and patience. These habits did not prevent future ambition. They tempered it. They provided a counterweight to the belief that scale alone ensures stability. The Roman experience taught that belief's limits. Its aftermath taught how to live beyond them, and that lesson, quiet, uncelebrated, and deeply human, remains one of history's most valuable inheritances. As the final strands of this long historical arc continue to unfold, the quiet centuries after Rome reveal a truth that becomes clearer with distance. The most powerful transformations are often those that never announce themselves. They take place not in councils or capitals, but in kitchens, fields, workshops, and shared spaces where daily life is negotiated. After Rome, people did not rebuild the world according to a new design. They adjusted. Adjustment is not a single decision. It is a sequence of responses made under constraint. When resources shrink, people prioritize. When authority recedes, people redistribute responsibility. When certainty dissolves, people rely on what they can observe and influence directly. This reliance reshaped social intelligence. People became skilled at reading one another. Reputation mattered because it predicted behavior. Memory mattered because it preserved lessons. Context mattered because rules were no longer universal. This contextual awareness replaced abstraction. Under empire, many decisions had been standardized. After empire, judgment returned to the local level. What worked in one place might not work in another. Flexibility was not optional. It was required. This requirement shaped how knowledge circulated. Knowledge was practical before it was theoretical. It moved through demonstration, imitation, and repetition. Skills were learned by watching, not reading. Solutions were tested through use, not decree. Such knowledge is slower to spread, but it is harder to lose, because it is embedded in bodies, routines, and environments. It survives the loss of texts and institutions. It persists as long as people continue to live and work together. This persistence explains why so much survived Rome without being consciously preserved. Fields continued to be cultivated. Paths continued to be used. Customs continued to be observed. None of these required imperial support. They required only continuity of practice. Practice is conservative. It resists sudden change not out of fear, but because reliability matters. When survival depends on predictable outcomes, untested novelty carries risk. This does not eliminate experimentation, but it confines it to manageable scales. Small experiments succeed or fail without endangering the whole. This containment of risk is a defining feature of the post-Roman world. Large failures had taught a lesson. When everything is connected, failure spreads. The answer was not isolation, but compartmentalization. Communities learned to limit exposure, to preserve margins, to avoid single points of collapse. Margins became essential. Margins of food, margins of authority, margins of expectation. These margins allowed error without catastrophe. They slowed growth, but they sustained life. In time, this margin consciousness became instinct. People prepared for lean years even in good ones. They avoided dependence on one source. They diversified skills. They planned with loss in mind. This planning was not pessimism. It was realism. Realism grounded in memory, even when that memory was no longer articulated. People did not need to recall Rome explicitly to live according to lessons learned in its aftermath. Those lessons had been absorbed into habit. Habit shaped emotion. Hope was quiet. Fear was familiar. Confidence was cautious. None of these emotions dominated entirely. They existed in balance, regulated by experience. This emotional balance supported social cohesion. Communities that expect difficulty are less likely to fracture when it arrives. They argue, but they continue. They suffer, but they rebuild. They adapt without needing to redefine themselves. This capacity to continue without reinvention is one of the most overlooked strengths of the post-Roman centuries. Change did not require identity crisis. People did not ask who they were becoming. They asked what needed to be done next. Identity was implicit in action, not explicit in narrative. The Roman Empire had offered a powerful narrative of order and belonging. Its absence replaced narrative with routine. Routine may seem empty by comparison, but it is durable. It carries meaning through repetition. It sustains cohesion without explanation. This is why the post-Roman world appears quiet, not because nothing happened, but because meaning was not announced. It was enacted. Fields were planted again. Disputes were settled again. Structures were repaired again. Each repetition reinforced the sense that life could continue without certainty. This continuity had long-term consequences. It shaped how later societies approached reform. Change was introduced gradually. Tradition was modified rather than discarded. Institutions evolved through accumulation rather than replacement. This evolutionary pattern contrasts sharply with revolutionary change. Revolutions seek clarity. They promise resolution. They attempt to reset expectations. The post-Roman world sought neither clarity nor resolution. It sought survivability. Survivability does not inspire manifestos. It inspires habits. These habits became the foundation upon which later complexity could safely return. When larger systems reappeared, they were built atop a substrate already adapted to uncertainty. That substrate mattered. It limited excess. It moderated ambition. It encouraged checks, balances, and layered authority. It preserved local autonomy within broader structures. Even when these principles were violated, they remained as reference points. Overreach was recognized as dangerous. Collapse was remembered as possible. This memory shaped restraint across centuries. The Roman collapse was not remembered as a single lesson. It was remembered as a condition that had been survived. Survival, once achieved, becomes expectation. And expectation shapes behavior more reliably than ideology. People who expect to endure behave differently from those who expect to dominate. They invest in relationships. They preserve flexibility. They accept limits. Limits in this context are not failures. They are boundaries within which life becomes predictable enough to sustain meaning. The post-Roman centuries demonstrate that predictability does not require control. It requires familiarity. Familiarity with people, with places, with rhythms. This familiarity anchored lives even when structures changed. And it is this anchoring, quiet, repeated, and largely unnoticed, that carried Western society through centuries of transformation without losing coherence. Rome fell as a system, What followed was not emptiness. It was practice. Practice of living without guarantees. Practice of adapting without announcement. Practice of continuing without certainty. These practices did not build monuments. They built endurance. And endurance, more than any empire, is what shapes the long course of history. As this meditation continues into its deepest layer, the aftermath of Rome reveals itself less as a historical episode and more as a long training in realism. Not realism as resignation, but realism as attentiveness to limits. The centuries that followed the empire did not teach people how to prevent collapse. They taught people how to live with the possibility of it. This distinction matters. Prevention assumes control. Living with possibility assumes adaptation. After Rome, adaptation became the primary skill. People learned to adjust expectations before circumstances forced them to. They learned to sense strain early, to reduce exposure, to retreat when necessary. Retreat, in this context, was not defeat. It was recalibration. When trade narrowed, communities intensified local exchange. When authority weakened, responsibility spread. When resources tightened, priorities clarified. These responses were not coordinated. They emerged organically from shared conditions. Shared conditions produce shared logic. Across wide regions, people arrived at similar conclusions without communicating them. That similarity was not cultural inheritance alone. It was practical convergence. When faced with scarcity and uncertainty, certain solutions simply work better than others. This convergence created a quiet unity, not a unity of law or language, but a unity of approach. An approach that valued margin over maximization, repair over replacement, and continuity over display. Display had once been central to imperial life. Monuments signaled power. Uniformity signaled order. Expansion signaled success. After Rome, these signals lost their function. What mattered was whether life could be sustained another season, another year, another generation. Sustainability became the unspoken metric, not measured formally but felt intuitively. Decisions were judged by whether they made tomorrow harder or easier. This intuitive judgment guided behavior more effectively than abstract principles. Abstraction faded. In its place came situational awareness. People paid attention to weather, soil, neighbors, and custom. Knowledge was immediate and contextual. It responded to what was present rather than what was promised. This attentiveness fostered humility. Humility not as moral posture, but as recognition of uncertainty. People knew they could not predict outcomes reliably. They planned cautiously. They avoided irreversible commitments when possible. Irreversibility had become suspect. The Roman system had been difficult to reverse. The scale made adjustment slow. When it could no longer sustain itself, the consequences were widespread. The post-Roman world learned to avoid designs that could not be unwound. This lesson influenced structure. Institutions remained modular. Authority was layered. Practices varied by place. Nothing was so rigid that it could not be modified. This modularity reduced efficiency, but increased resilience. Resilience depends on options. Options require redundancy. Redundancy requires acceptance of inefficiency. This trade-off became embedded in practice. People accepted slower processes in exchange for survivability. Time was no longer something to compress. It was something to move through carefully. Waiting was not failure. Delay was often protection. Decisions made too quickly were suspect, not admired. This patience shaped social interaction. Negotiation mattered. Consensus mattered. Conflict was resolved incrementally. Sudden resolution carried risk. Stability emerged from ongoing adjustment rather than final agreement. Such an approach does not produce clarity. Produces continuity. Continuity is difficult to narrate. It lacks decisive moments. It resists summary. Yet it is precisely continuity that allowed societies to persist through centuries of uncertainty. The Roman collapse did not destroy continuity. It shifted its basis. Continuity moved from institution to practice, from command to habit, from abstraction to repetition. What survived did so because it was done again and again. Doing something again is not dramatic, but repetition is powerful. It embeds knowledge. It reinforces expectation. It shapes behavior without instruction. Over time, repetition becomes identity. Identity in the post-Roman world was not proclaimed. It was lived. People did not define themselves by what they believed about history. They defined themselves by what they did when faced with ordinary demands. How they worked, shared, repaired, and endured. This lived identity proved stable, could accommodate change without dissolving. New elements were absorbed gradually. Old ones were released quietly. The whole shifted without breaking. This capacity for quiet absorption explains how later complexity returned without erasing the past. When larger systems eventually reappeared, they did not encounter a blank landscape. They encountered societies already skilled at managing uncertainty, already cautious of overreach, already familiar with adjustment. These skills mattered. They limited damage when ambition exceeded capacity. They preserved coherence when coordination faltered. They provided a buffer between aspiration and collapse. In this sense, the post-Roman centuries were not merely a recovery period. They were an education in limits, in patience, in shared responsibility. An education conducted without curriculum, learned through consequence rather than instruction. Such education leaves no monuments. It leaves habits. Habits of planning for scarcity. Habits of distributing risk. Habits of repairing rather than discarding. Habits of valuing familiarity over novelty. These habits shaped emotional life as well. People learned to accept uncertainty without panic, to endure difficulty without interpreting it as failure, to find meaning in continuity rather than progress. This emotional posture is difficult to achieve deliberately. It usually emerges only after guarantees disappear. Rome's disappearance provided that lesson at scale, not through catastrophe alone, but through prolonged adjustment, through generations who never knew the empire, yet lived according to lessons learned in its absence. These generations did not see themselves as transitional. They saw themselves as normal. Normality is a powerful stabilizer. When life feels normal, effort continues. When effort continues, systems persist. When systems persist, history moves forward quietly. This quiet forward movement is the defining feature of the post-Roman world. It did not rush toward a future, carried the past forward selectively. It filtered experience through necessity. It valued what worked and discarded what did not. Rome, in this process, became neither model nor warning. It became background, and in becoming background, it exerted influence without command. This influence shaped how people thought about power, scale, and endurance long after the empire itself had faded. It suggested that strength lies not in control, but in adaptability. That continuity does not require permanence. That meaning survives not because systems succeed, but because people continue to act within them. This is the deeper story revealed by Rome's quiet collapse. Not the story of an ending, but of a long recalibration. A recalibration that taught societies how to live with uncertainty as a constant companion. And that lesson, absorbed slowly, practiced daily, and rarely named, proved more enduring than any imperial decree. As this reflection continues, the long aftermath of Rome clarifies a final, subtle transformation. One that unfolded so gradually it was rarely noticed at all. The transformation was not political or economic in the narrow sense. It was perceptual. People learned to see stability differently. Under the Roman system, stability had been visible. It appeared in stone roads, standing armies, uniform law, and public authority. Order could be pointed to, could be measured, could be enforced. When those visible markers receded, stability did not vanish, but it changed where it lived. Stability moved inward. It resided less in institutions and more in expectations, less in commands and more in habits, less in spectacle and more in repetition. This inward shift altered how people interpreted the world around them. Disruption no longer implied collapse. A failed harvest, a weakened ruler, a damaged road. These were serious, but they were no longer existential. Life had already demonstrated that it could continue without centralized repair. Communities had learned to absorb shock by adjusting behavior rather than waiting for restoration. This capacity for absorption reshaped collective psychology. People no longer assumed that systems existed to protect them fully. Protection was partial, conditional, negotiated. This assumption did not breed cynicism. It bred attentiveness. Attentiveness to limits. Attentiveness to relationships. Attentiveness to timing. Timing mattered more than force. When to act. When to wait. When to compromise. When to retreat. These judgments were situational, informed by memory rather than rule. They required patience and local knowledge rather than authority. The Roman world had valued decisiveness. The post-Roman world learned the value of delay. Delay allowed information to surface. It allowed emotions to settle. It reduced irreversible error. In an environment where resources were limited and recovery slow, delay often preserved options. Options were essential. Options meant survival. The disappearance of imperial guarantees forced communities to think in terms of alternatives. What if the market failed? What if the Lord withdrew? What if the harvest was poor? Planning did not eliminate risk, but it made risk manageable. This planning was rarely explicit. It lived in routines, in storing surplus when possible, in maintaining relationships across households, in avoiding commitments that could not be honored under strain. Over time, these routines created a culture of contingency, a culture that expected interruption, a culture that valued repair, a culture that accepted incompleteness. Incompleteness became normal. Projects were rarely finished in a single generation. Buildings evolved slowly. Fields changed shape over decades. Institutions accumulated layers. Nothing was assumed to be final. This acceptance reduced disappointment. When permanence is not expected, loss does not feel like betrayal. It feels like change. This emotional adjustment mattered deeply. It allowed people to continue investing effort even when outcomes were uncertain. Effort continued because meaning did not depend on results alone. Meaning was found in participation. Participation meant showing up repeatedly at work, at worship, at negotiation. It meant fulfilling roles even when rewards were modest. It meant maintaining continuity rather than achieving transformation. The Roman Empire had once offered meaning through belonging to something vast. Its absence offered meaning through contribution to something immediate. This immediacy strengthened social bonds. People depended on one another more directly. Failure was visible. Success was shared. Reputation mattered because consequences were personal. This personal scale constrained behavior more effectively than distant law. Constraint did not feel oppressive. It felt familiar. Familiarity is one of the strongest stabilizers of human behavior. When expectations are clear and repeated, anxiety decreases. People know how to act. They know what will be tolerated. They know what will provoke response. The post-Roman world cultivated this familiarity through repetition rather than instruction. Custom replaced command. Custom is slower to change, but harder to remove, because it is embedded in practice, not policy. When later systems attempted to impose uniform solutions, they encountered this embedded custom. Sometimes they adapted to it. Sometimes they collided with it, but they could not ignore it. This resistance was not ideological. It was habitual. People returned to what they knew worked when pressure increased. This reflex protected continuity when innovation failed. In this way, the centuries after Rome created a kind of historical inertia. Not inertia as stagnation, but as momentum grounded in experience. A tendency to revert to survivable patterns when conditions worsened. These patterns were not designed. They were discovered. Discovered through loss. Discovered through repetition. Discovered through living without guarantees. This discovery process shaped how later generations approached complexity. They did not reject it, but they approached it cautiously. They layered new systems onto old practices. They preserved fallback options. Fallback options are rarely celebrated. They are invisible when systems function well, but they are decisive when systems falter. The post-Roman centuries ensured that fallback options remained available. They preserved local authority, shared responsibility, and adaptable practice. These elements acted as shock absorbers across time. Even today, traces remain. Ideas about decentralization, community resilience, and redundancy echo lessons learned long before they were named. They reflect a deep historical memory that recognizes the limits of scale and the necessity of flexibility. This memory does not argue against ambition. It argues for proportion. The Roman experience showed what ambition could achieve. Its aftermath showed what ambition could cost. Together, they formed a complete historical lesson, one that spans achievement and adjustment, expansion and endurance. The quiet collapse of Rome matters not because it predicts future endings, but because it reveals how humans live after certainty dissolves. It shows that order does not disappear when systems fail. It relocates. Order moves into habit, into expectation, into shared practice, and there it often becomes stronger. People do not need to understand history to live within its lessons. They absorb those lessons through routine, through what they repeat, through what they repair, through what they preserve when no one is watching. Rome's final influence was not a warning carved in stone. It was a pattern of behavior, a pattern learned slowly across generations under ordinary conditions, a pattern that allowed societies to persist without spectacle. And it is this pattern, quiet, resilient, and deeply human, that continues to shape the long course of history long after empires fade. As this final extension of the narrative unfolds, the long centuries after Rome reveal their most enduring outcome: a transformation in how continuity itself was understood. Continuity no longer meant keeping things the same. It meant keeping things workable. This distinction shaped behavior more deeply than any formal doctrine. Workability became the quiet standard. A practice was kept not because it was ancient, but because it functioned. A custom survived not because it was sacred, but because it reduced friction. Authority endured not because it was imposed, but because it mediated conflict effectively. Over time, usefulness replaced legitimacy as the measure of endurance. This shift altered how people related to the past. The past was no longer a blueprint. It was a reservoir. Elements were drawn from it selectively, adapted to present needs. Reverence was practical rather than nostalgic. Memory served action, not identity. In such a world, tradition did not freeze behavior. It guided it. Guidance without command allows variation. Variation allows learning. Learning allows adaptation. This chain sustained societies that no longer relied on centralized correction. Central correction had once been Rome's promise. Its withdrawal exposed the cost of dependence. In response, communities internalized correction. Feedback loops shortened. Consequences became visible quickly. Adjustments were made locally. Local adjustment is slow to spread, but it is fast to respond. This trade-off proved decisive. When shocks occurred, climatic, economic, political, local systems responded immediately, even if imperfectly. They did not wait for coordination that might never arrive. Waiting had become risky. Risk awareness became embedded in judgment. People evaluated decisions not only by potential gain, but by reversibility. Choices that could be undone were favored over those that could not. This preference reduced catastrophic error. Catastrophe had once arrived through rigidity. The Roman system, optimized for coordination, struggled to retreat gracefully. Its aftermath taught the value of retreat as strategy. Withdrawing from an unsustainable position preserved resources and options. Retreat was not shameful. It was intelligent. This intelligence reshaped social expectations. Leaders who moderated ambition were respected. Communities that conserved resources were admired. Prudence became a social virtue grounded in experience. Experience mattered more than explanation. The lessons of Rome's disappearance were not taught in speeches. They were learned through consequence. Children grew up observing how adults responded to uncertainty. Those responses became normal. Normality, once established, is powerful. It defines what feels reasonable. It shapes instinct. It determines which actions seem excessive or reckless. Over generations, this sense of reasonableness formed a cultural baseline. That baseline valued continuity over display. Display had once communicated power. After Rome, it communicated risk. Excess attracted attention, envy, and instability. Modesty preserved autonomy. This inversion altered social signaling. Quiet competence replaced spectacle. Reliability replaced assertion. Trust replaced command. Trust is fragile but cumulative. It builds slowly through repeated interaction. It dissolves quickly when violated. Because it is difficult to regain, it encourages restraint. This restraint stabilized communities in the absence of enforcement. Enforcement did not vanish entirely, but it became layered and negotiated. Authority depended on cooperation. Cooperation depended on trust. Trust depended on behavior over time. This interdependence discouraged extremes. Extremes disrupt trust. They introduce unpredictability. Unpredictability was the enemy of survivability. The post-Roman world learned to minimize unpredictability through habit. Habits narrowed the range of acceptable behavior. They created shared expectations that reduced surprise. Surprise is costly. It demands rapid adaptation, which consumes resources. In environments with limited surplus, reducing surprise preserved life. Predictable routines were not boring. They were protective. Protection did not guarantee comfort. Life remained difficult, but difficulty was familiar. Familiar difficulty is easier to endure than unfamiliar ease. It allows preparation. It allows adjustment. This familiarity shaped emotional regulation. People learned to expect setbacks. They did not interpret them as personal failure or cosmic injustice. They interpreted them as part of the landscape. This interpretation reduced despair. Reduced despair sustained effort. Effort, sustained across generations, produced slow improvement. Not dramatic growth, but incremental reliability. Fields became more productive, tools more refined, institutions more coherent. These improvements were cumulative. They did not require vision. They required persistence. Persistence thrives when goals are modest and shared. The post-Roman world excelled at this. Goals were concrete. Survive winter, maintain peace, raise children, pass on land. Large abstractions faded. Life narrowed in scope but deepened in continuity. People lived within known bounds, but those bounds were stable enough to support meaning. Meaning does not require novelty. It requires coherence. Coherence emerged from repetition, from seeing effort lead to continuity, from knowing that actions mattered, even if outcomes were limited. This sense of matching is crucial. It anchors identity. It motivates care. It sustains investment in shared systems. When people believe their actions contribute to continuity, they continue to act. Rome's disappearance threatened this belief initially, but over time, new forms of contribution emerged. People discovered that continuity did not depend on empire. It depended on participation. Participation replaced allegiance. One belonged by contributing, not by declaring loyalty to a distant authority. This shift grounded identity in action rather than ideology. Action is harder to fake. It requires presence. It demands consistency. It exposes failure. This exposure reinforced accountability. Accountability stabilized relationships. Stable relationships stabilized communities. Stabilized communities endured. This endurance is the central outcome of the post-Roman centuries. Not a renaissance of scale, but a refinement of survivability. When larger systems eventually returned, they encountered societies already trained in endurance. These societies could absorb complexity without losing coherence. They had fallback practices. They had margins. They had memory even when that memory was unspoken. This unspoken memory guided judgment long after Rome was no longer named. It informed skepticism toward absolute claims. It encouraged balance. It moderated ambition. Ambition returned, but it returned changed. It was tempered by awareness of limits. It was shaped by concern for sustainability. It was embedded in structures that allowed retreat. This tempering is Rome's final influence. Not the grandeur of what it built, but the caution inspired by its disappearance. The quiet centuries that followed did not merely fill time. They formed character. A character defined by adaptability, patience, and shared responsibility. These traits do not announce themselves in history books. They reveal themselves only in survival. And survival, extended across centuries, is the strongest evidence of historical success. Rome's collapse did not end history. It taught history how to continue. And that lesson, learned without instruction, practiced without proclamation, remains one of the most valuable inheritances of the past. As this final continuation unfolds, the long aftermath of Rome resolves into a simple but demanding truth. Societies endure not because they prevent failure, but because they learn how to live with it. The Roman world had invested heavily in preventing disorder through scale and coordination. Its successors learned something different, that resilience comes from expecting disruption and preparing to absorb it. This expectation reshaped how effort was valued. Effort was no longer justified by promised outcomes. It was justified by maintenance. Fields were worked not because prosperity was guaranteed, but because continuity depended on care. Buildings were repaired not because they would last forever, but because neglect would hasten decline. Maintenance became meaning that did not rely on progress or achievement, meaning grounded in responsibility, in showing up again, even when results were modest. This orientation required emotional adjustment. People learned to separate worth from success. A failed harvest did not imply moral failure. A weakened authority did not imply chaos. Loss was contextualized as part of a longer rhythm. This emotional framing preserved dignity under strain. Dignity matters. It sustains participation. When people feel their effort retains value even under adversity, they continue to contribute. When contribution continues, systems persist, even in reduced form. The post-Roman centuries demonstrate this repeatedly. Reduced systems endured because participation did not depend on optimism. It depended on obligation, habit, and shared understanding. These elements outlasted institutions. Institutions are visible. Habits are not. Yet habits are often stronger. They do not require enforcement. They survive leadership change. They adapt quietly. When institutions fail, habits reorganize life beneath them. This is why the Roman collapse did not produce uniform breakdown. It produced differentiation. Some regions adapted quickly, others slowly. Some retained fragments of imperial order longer. Others moved on. This unevenness was not weakness. It was insulation. Insulation prevents cascading failure. When systems are tightly coupled, failure spreads. When they are loosely connected, failure is contained. The post-Roman world became loosely connected by necessity. This looseness allowed survival. It also changed how people understood coordination. Coordination was no longer assumed. It was negotiated, temporary, purpose-specific. This made it more fragile, but also more flexible. Flexibility proved decisive. When circumstances changed, flexible systems adjusted. Rigid ones fractured. The memory of Rome's rigidity, though rarely articulated, lingered as caution. Caution shaped design. Structures were built to be altered. Authority was shared. Roles overlapped. Redundancy was tolerated. These choices slowed efficiency, but they preserved continuity. Continuity became the highest value. Not continuity of form, but continuity of function. What mattered was that life could go on in recognizable ways. That roles remained intelligible. That expectations remained stable enough to coordinate behavior. This stability was quiet. It did not depend on spectacle or narrative. It depended on repetition, on doing the same necessary things day after day. Repetition does not excite attention, but it builds trust. Trust that tomorrow will resemble today closely enough to plan. Trust that effort will not be wasted entirely. Trust that cooperation remains worthwhile. Trust is cumulative. Each fulfilled obligation strengthens it. Each repaired relationship reinforces it. Each survived difficulty confirms it. Over time, trust becomes the background condition of life. The Roman world had relied less on trust and more on command. Command can create order quickly. Trust creates order slowly. But trust endures when command withdraws. The centuries after Rome invested heavily, often unknowingly, in trust-based order. This investment paid dividends over time. It allowed societies to survive without guarantees. It allowed them to absorb new elements without losing coherence. It allowed them to remember Rome without trying to restore it. Rome's memory did not disappear. It softened. It became reference rather than goal, influence rather than authority, resource rather than command. This soft memory was easier to integrate. It did not demand loyalty. It invited adaptation. It allowed people to take what was useful and leave the rest. Such selective inheritance is the hallmark of resilient cultures. They do not preserve everything. They preserve what works. This selection process is not guided by ideology. It is guided by consequence. Practices that sustain life are repeated. Those that do not are abandoned. Over generations, this produces a refined set of behaviors suited to prevailing conditions. The post-Roman world refined itself in this way. Slowly, imperfectly, quietly. It did not aim to solve history. It aimed to live within it. This aim shaped the long trajectory of Western societies more deeply than any single reform or conquest. It produced a disposition toward moderation, repair, and patience. These dispositions are not dramatic. They rarely appear in records, yet they influence everything. They shape how people respond to crisis, how they judge authority, how they balance ambition and restraint. Even in later periods of rapid expansion, these dispositions remained present as counterweights. When growth accelerated, caution followed. When systems centralized, demands for balance emerged. These reactions did not arise spontaneously. They were inherited from centuries lived without imperial certainty, inherited from habits formed under constraint, inherited from communities that learned to endure by expecting limits. The fall of Rome, viewed through this lens, is not simply a story about the past. It is a case study in human adaptability. It shows that people do not require permanence to live meaningfully. They require coherence, familiarity, participation. When those exist, life continues even under reduced conditions. The Roman Empire ended as a system of command. What followed was a system of practice. Practice is slower, but practice is durable. It survives leadership change. It survives institutional collapse. It survives uncertainty. Practice accumulates, and accumulation over time shapes history more reliably than intention. This is the final lesson of Rome's quiet collapse. Not that greatness is fragile, but that continuity is learned through repetition, learned through repair, learned through living without guarantees. And once learned, it does not vanish. It becomes the background knowledge of a civilization, a knowledge that allows societies to persist long after empires fade into the landscape. As this final extension continues, the long shadow of Rome's disappearance resolves into an understanding that is both demanding and reassuring. History does not require permanence to produce meaning. Meaning emerges from continuity of effort, not continuity of structure. The post-Roman centuries demonstrate this with remarkable clarity. When empire faded, the idea of a guaranteed future faded with it. What replaced that guarantee was not despair, but attentiveness. People learned to watch conditions closely. They adjusted before crisis became collapse. They measured success not by expansion, but by survivability. This shift was not philosophical. It was practical. Practicality became the dominant form of wisdom. Wisdom no longer meant knowing universal rules. It meant knowing when to act and when to wait. It meant understanding local limits. It meant recognizing the signs of strain early enough to respond without panic. This form of wisdom cannot be centralized. It depends on presence. Presence in the landscape, presence in relationships, presence in routine. Those who lived after Rome were present in ways that imperial administration had often bypassed. Their lives required attention to immediate realities rather than distant abstractions. Attention reshaped responsibility. Responsibility became inseparable from participation. One could not delegate care entirely to authority. Fields, paths, buildings, and relationships demanded involvement. Neglect had visible consequences. Care produced tangible stability. This visibility reinforced accountability. Accountability did not flow upward. It flowed outward. Neighbors noticed. Memory recorded. Reputation mattered. This social awareness regulated behavior more effectively than distant punishment. Such regulation is slower but deeper. It shapes instinct rather than compliance. People act responsibly not because they fear enforcement, but because they anticipate consequence within a web of relationships. This web was the true infrastructure of the post-Roman world. Invisible, adaptive, and resilient. When political structures weakened, this social infrastructure remained. It absorbed pressure. It redistributed responsibility, prevented collapse from becoming total. The Roman system had relied on visible infrastructure: roads, laws, armies. When those failed, vulnerability was exposed. The post-Roman world relied on invisible infrastructure: habits, expectations, shared knowledge. These could not be dismantled easily. They lived in people. Because they lived in people, they traveled with them. They adapted to new contexts. They survived migration, disruption, and reform. They were not fixed to place or institution. This portability mattered. It allowed continuity even when landscapes changed, even when authority shifted, even when resources fluctuated. People carried stability with them in the form of practice. Practice is slow to teach, but once learned, it is hard to erase. This is why the centuries after Rome appear quiet. Not because little happened, but because what happened was internalized rather than proclaimed. Change occurred within behavior rather than ideology. Ideology requires consensus. Behavior requires repetition. Repetition proved more durable. Through repetition, people learned that life could be meaningful without grandeur, that effort mattered even without promise, that cooperation was rational even when outcomes were uncertain. This rationality is subtle. It does not inspire loyalty through vision. It sustains participation through experience. People continue to cooperate because cooperation has worked before. This experiential trust stabilized societies across time. When new systems emerged, they encountered populations already skilled in maintaining continuity under strain. These populations could accept innovation without surrendering resilience. Innovation layered itself onto practice rather than replacing it. This layering prevented rupture. Rupture had been costly. The Roman experience demonstrated the danger of systems that could not retreat. The post-Roman world internalized retreat as option rather than failure. Options matter. They preserve agency. Agency, in turn, preserves dignity. Dignity preserved effort. Effort preserved continuity. This chain of preservation operated quietly across generations. It did not require awareness of history. It required only participation in routine. Most people who lived through these centuries did not consider themselves adaptive. They considered themselves ordinary. They did what needed to be done. That ordinariness is history's most underestimated force. Empires rise through extraordinary coordination. Societies endure through ordinary repetition. The Roman Empire achieved extraordinary things. Its absence revealed the power of ordinary persistence. This persistence did not erase Rome's influence, transformed it. Rome ceased to command, continued to inform. Its stones became materials. Its language became habit. Its ideas became reference. The scale became caution. In this form, Rome lasted longer than it ever could as an empire. Because influence without command is easier to sustain. Command invites resistance. Influence invites adaptation. The centuries after Rome demonstrate the advantage of adaptation. They show that civilizations do not survive by freezing themselves at a peak, but by allowing themselves to change without losing coherence. Coherence is the key, not uniformity, not control. Coherence, the ability for parts to relate meaningfully, even as forms shift. This coherence was built patiently, through shared labor, through repeated negotiation, through attention to limits, through acceptance of uncertainty, through trust that continuity was possible, even when permanence was not. This trust is Rome's final inheritance, not an institution, not a monument, a disposition, a way of relating to the world that expects strain and prepares for it, that values repair over replacement, that measures success by endurance. This disposition has shaped history far more deeply than any single decree or conquest. It operates quietly, it persists unnoticed, and it ensures that when systems fail, life does not. That is the lasting lesson of Rome's quiet collapse. Not that empires fall, but that people continue. And in continuing, they shape the future more reliably than power ever could.